TV signal here. Okay. Great. All right. Good evening. This is the meeting of the Bolton Board of Selectmen on Thursday, February 26th, 2015. The first item on our agenda is a public hearing on the petition of Verizon New England and Massachusetts Electric to place a new jointly owned pole approximately 1,757 feet northerly of the center line of Wattaquatic Road on Ballville Road, and also to relocate a jointly owned pole 1,065 feet north of the center of Wattaquatic Hill Road on Ballville Road. And we have Representative Verizon.
Hi. Kellyanne Condon, I represent Verizon. This is all in conjunction with National Grid's upgrades. A lot of the poles out in the field are undersized. They're placing newer, taller, heavier poles to carry the weight of the wires, respanning some of the spans just so the lines are more evened out. The pole on the pole isn't going to make more lean, basically. So in this pole line, pole 9, they just want to move it 25 feet northerly, I believe, from where it is now. And it's going to be right in front of 289, but the area along the street there is wooded. It doesn't affect like a house, line of sight, anything. And then the other pole is more down toward the end of the pole line there. That's a stub pole going across the street from existing pole 15. Right now there's a guy wire in a tree right there. So they want to just alleviate that. Again, it's all woods. There's no house on that side of the street.
All right. Mark Case, our tree warden, have you had a chance to
Yeah, I went out
this
there. We received this a couple weeks ago. Of course, the snowbanks have been pretty high, so to say this, to see the exact stake location was impossible. But she's correct that those anywhere off within that town easement off the edge of the road is fine in that area, and it's good to get those guy wires out of that oak tree. So I don't see any problems with either one of these poles.
All right. Do we have any public comment? And I guess starting first with abutters or folks who live on Ballville Road in the location near these poles? No? And then any other public comment from anyone on this issue? All right.
Well,
Seems
how close to the edge of pavement are the poles going?
They did not. So I can find that out. I don't know. And again, without the stakes being right there. I know this pole 25 will be right in line with where it is. I'm sorry, pole 9, one being moved 25 feet, will be right in line with where it is now, where the current pole is, the same distance off the road, because right there is where the pole line crosses the street, so they'll keep that.
It's actually
pretty much
very beneficial to move the pole up too, because that's right where the rock ledges creep out on the corner, on that inside corner. And by getting it up, it'll actually, that existing pole will be further off the turn, off the edge of the pavement.
Yeah, there's a tendency to get it right up next to the edge of pavement, which I go by one on Long Hill every day.
You have to drive around a couple of them.
Yeah.
I know. Well, I think the purpose of that is keeping it within the town taking. Some roads don't have as much leeway on the sides there, but yeah.
So also going around the corner with the pole right there is not very safe, so it just means you're gonna have to replace it more often. And do you have a schedule for when the wires are actually gonna be moved on any of these, or is this just gonna be another addition to our pine forest here?
Again, it just goes with their notification process between companies. It's all regulated. It's what happens is as soon as the pole is set, Verizon sends notification first to the electric company.
Okay.
Electric.
And legally, how long are they supposed to have before they move the wires?
I don't know that there's any legal requirement. I know the worst thing that happens is sometimes if it's not service affecting, it just gets put into their schedule when they can kind of schedule it or when they're looking for filler work. Not a great answer, but that's the reality of what it is. As soon as electric transfers, they send notification back to Verizon, the cable company is notified, the town is notified if there's fire alarm or anything like that on the pole. Any other service providers that are on there are notified at that time too, and they can all make their transfers at any point. It's always electric first, so that they're not interfering with.
Well, since this is a joint run with National Grid, they should know when they're gonna be doing the project, right?
They do get notifications. I mean, obviously, if I get approvals tonight, they're not gonna do anything until the weather breaks, so.
This particular work, there shouldn't be any double pole issues because of just what's being proposed.
Well, it's a matter of putting a new pole and then getting everything moved and pulling
Right,
the
oh, yeah.
poles out, so.
I mean, but they're not, they're double poles, but they're across the road from each
Right,
other.
yeah. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Well, I guess I will move that we increase our pine forest here and approve the new poles for Verizon and Mass Electric.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. The next item on our agenda is a discussion of potential articles regarding the Route 117 transfer to the Department of Transportation, possibly, or articles regarding traffic engineering studies. Want me to start? Do you have thoughts on this, Stan?
You can start. I mean, don't have any questions. I'm in favor of putting it on the warrant.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've had a lot of discussion on the whole 117 issue, and it strikes me that doing nothing isn't an option forever, and that's kind of the approach the town has taken on 117, sort of west of 495, and we've got 23,000 cars a day. Most of them are from out of town, and so something's going to have to be done. And our existing, the existing state of things is difficult from folks on the north side of town to get to the south, and vice versa. And we've had people put together reports for 10 or 12 years saying we need to look at lights, we need to think about sidewalks, we need to think about bike lanes, and I think that those things are more likely to occur under state ownership. I think there'd be not just cost savings on maintenance, there'd be cost savings on the infrastructure. And those are things we need to think about, because we have just this year, I mean, snow and ice is going to be a huge cost. We've got OPEP we're worried about. We've got a massive increase in the school budget. So I think those are things we have to think about. The flip side is, and people raise some legitimate concerns about the lack of control, or we're going to lose some control, and I think some of the risks are overstated, but I think it's something that on balance town meeting ought to consider that a transfer to the state of responsibility for 117. But I also think it makes sense to couple that, if folks aren't inclined to do that, or if town meeting isn't inclined to do it, that we ought to have an option on the warrant of some engineering studies to do some of the work on 117 that we know is going to be required. Whether the state does it or the town does it, it's going to be necessary. And I'm thinking particularly of the intersection of Still River and 117, and also the question of what's the best way to handle the Manor Road, Aquatic Road intersections there, and preliminary engineering studies. So I guess where I come out is to say they both ought to be on the warrant. We ought to have the option of the transfer, and then also have sort of in the alternative for town meeting to consider, if folks are not inclined to go forward with the transfer, to consider to doing some of the engineering work that we know is going to be required there. So that's.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, because I mean, to your point, we can't have no action. We need to have some action, and I think also to your point, I think some of the fears that have been stated have been overstated, and the gentleman from the state has indicated that they're not going to be widening 117, and if you actually drive 117 from 495 to 190, the sheer number of homes that either would have to be moved back or taken by eminent domain is just astronomical and would never occur. So that's a cost that's the state's not going to bear, and there's no sense of widening the road in one spot and not widening it all the way, which they're not going to do. So I think the fears are overblown, But I think this is a great opportunity where, while we might lose a little bit of control, we really don't have much control over Route 117 to begin with. There's nothing we can do on our own. We have to get approval by the state has to approve our, whatever plans we have, but we get to foot the bill. And there are a number of things that are coming up over the course of 10 years that someone's gonna have to pay for. You know, the resurfacing of 117 is an absolute reality within the next 10 years. Doing something about the 117 and 110 intersection is something that's gonna have to be done. Even if we do nothing with re-engineering the intersection, the traffic controls are antique at this point, and at some point, we're not gonna be able, if something breaks, we're not gonna have replacement parts, and that's $250,000 alone. There's culvert work that has to be done, and I think this is an opportunity where, you know, the state is interested in assuming ownership and taking over responsibility, and it's mainly for the maintenance of the road and providing some safety improvements. And I believe that the state is also willing to now look at taking over the entire stretch of 117 within the town of Bolton. At first, it was just 495 to 190. Now they're willing to consider taking over from the Stowe line to 190, which I think, you know.
Oh, I didn't realize that. When
That was something I was going to,
Anyway, so they're considering that. So I mean, there's potentially even greater savings. And for the gentleman who spoke the last time about some of the issues of the intersection of at the Route 495 interchange, you know, I think the state is reevaluating, potentially going to do more engineering to potentially alleviate some of the issues that are there. I mean, they did some work, and they did what they could within the confines of what exists there to alleviate the backup of traffic on 495. Just recently, I believe that they're also willing to entertain reducing the speed limit by the high school. They're also willing to look at, you know, putting a delay in for the left-hand turn onto Sugar Road. So the state, I think, over the course of the last few years, has become much more amenable to really working with towns. And I think this is a great opportunity to take advantage of that and potentially save upwards of $1.5 to $2 million in taxpayer money over the course of the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think I would just like to add on to that. I mean, the other, there's been a lot of work by people in town on the town common project, and for that to really be effectively used, it means you're getting some lights and some turn lanes in at Wattaquatic and 117. Without that, access into that is going to be almost impossible, and that's also some of the work that the state, in a very preliminary fashion, without any review, without any feedback from the town or anything, put at least a preliminary plan in place that showed that it's at least feasible to do. Obviously, there's a lot more work to finalize that and make people as happy as they can be with a project like that. So I think.
what do you?
I think. I mean, the other thing that's been mentioned, and I don't know whether we want it this year, was doing some engineering work on, or the preliminary work on whether or not we can get a truck exclusion on Wattaquatic. I'm not sure whether that ends up being feasible or not, but.
But that's something we can pursue.
It's something that we could pursue, but again, it's
in
engineering work, and it might be something we could get the state to
Right.
nibble at, but.
Right. What do each of you think about the idea of sort of, to give folks at town meeting the alternative on, to look at the town picking up some of the engineering costs for this work and put that in a separate warrant article?
I think, I mean, Ken Troop mentioned it at our last meeting, is that there's been, years and years of, well, I guess I generously call it benign neglect of 117. We just kind of, we put a new layer of hot top on and draw some lines and close our eyes and hope that it's, that it serves for a while longer. And I think, so I mean, these intersections that we're talking about are chronic problems. They're the root cause of a lot of the backups that we have to deal with. So I think the town needs, unfortunately, we need to spend some money on our infrastructure, the same as any homeowner has to spend money on maintenance and repairs. And I think 117 needs that attention.
I mean, I would agree, if the town's not willing to turn it over to the state, the town needs to be willing to spend some money to provide some upgrades to that road.
I mean, we spent a lot of committees looking at it and saying, gee, we need to do this work, and then we never move that forward. So I think we need to start taking some of those recommendations seriously and start making some of the improvements that have really been identified as being needed for the town.
Do you think we should have a single warrant article with both those, the Still River and the Aquatic Manor issues, or should we break those out? Give town meeting a menu?
I mean, it probably can't hurt to give them a menu.
Yeah.
You know, if the first article fails,
Mhm.
give them a menu.
No. Donna, you can be able to sort of quantify that so that we could put together an article that would have a sort of a meaningful request for a meaningful level of engineering services for each of those two things.
I think so. We have a pretty good first cut right now. For instance, at Still River, since we aren't talking about re-engineering the intersection, we're really talking about hardware upgrade, replacing the antiquated hardware that's there. Because when we get into re-engineering and redesign, that's a whole nother level of work.
Right.
So we're looking at about $20,000 for permitting and the like, and about $250,000 for the hardware. So it's slightly above $250,000 to do that. And so, but there's no real engineering, it's just replacing what's there in the same
Right.
footprint. As far as engineering, Aquatic slash Manor slash Harvard, really, we're looking at probably about $150,000 to $200,000 for engineering for that. DOT had said before that the estimated cost was $1 to $2 million, and refining that a little bit more is probably more like 1.5 to 2 million. So, the norm of taking 10% of the projected project
Right.
price for engineering, which is about right. So, I know it's 1.5. I mean, it's 150 to 200,000 to do Aquatic. I can't imagine it's that much more to include Manor and Harvard, and I'll refine that a little bit. But
Right.
but that absolutely should be included in that. Those intersections
Yeah.
can't be
Okay.
ignored.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, and I think Stan's point, it probably does make sense to have sort of two articles there,
Mhm.
separately break those out for.
And if you do want to, I can cover more ground on this, I've already covered some, but as far as the exclusion of truck traffic goes, I have gotten a pretty good estimate of $10,000 to do the appropriate traffic work and so
Mhm.
forth in order to get us to a conclusion on that.
Right.
It's not going to be a terribly easy mark to hit. It's not easy to do, but it is possible, and I want to try to pursue it as much as I can.
Okay.
Mhm. All right.
Okay, well, then I guess
We have some public comment on this?
First of all, so that I understand this.
I'm sorry, introduce yourself,
Oh,
sir.
sorry, Dave Lindsay, Berlin Road. I'm getting the impression that you would want to appropriate some money this year in your second alternative, is that right? You
Right.
want-
Yes.
yeah. So the town would have a vote on whether or not to have the state take over, and then it would have a vote on whether or not to appropriate some money to start these projects.
Right, though obviously if the state, if it was a affirmative vote on the state takeover, then we
Yeah.
pass over these other two articles.
It occurs to me this is a very tough budget year to add still something more to what is already looking overwhelming. And second, it is possible the town could vote all of that down, right? There's nothing.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. But I think it's always a tough budget year, and that's why for the last, 20 years, none of this has happened.
I've been watching budget years for a long time now. This is certainly worse than most so far.
Well, it turned to be worse than most because of the schools, so.
Yeah.
Well, schools and OPEB together are a pretty lethal combination.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Keep, 752 Main Street. I guess what I've noticed, I guess at the last two meetings with Barry Lorian, the representative from Mass Department of Transportation, is that, you know, whenever the community brought up concerns, he found polite ways to say no. Especially at the first meeting. At the second meeting, he started to be a little bit more amenable, and now, you know, we have two of the selectmen announcing further, you know, further things that Mass DOT might be willing to do. And I just say, you know, the town of Bolton needs to negotiate a little bit harder and not just give it away. There are a lot of concerns people have. The high school is one of them. You know, the last thing Barry said was maybe he could get the speed limit down to 40. That's not enough. Just last night I was on 111 in Harvard. The speed limit there for the state road from 495 to the center of Harvard is between 30 and 35. Why can't
Yeah, well, it's a twisting road up a hill, right?
Yeah, but no, it's a state road. It's got the same widths, the same care. We've got a
Well, it's got reflectors in the middle of the road because the state put them there, right?
We've got a high school and a pizza joint and kids running across. We have a post office. So why can't the speed limit be lower there? And I know parents in 3 towns are concerned about that.
But, well,
These are the types of
reality
things,
is,
these are the types of things that need to be negotiated beforehand, not after we give it away.
I think we all agree the speed limit at the high school is too high. Unfortunately, I mean, the state has, or state and or federal have regulations on how to set speed limits. It's not just an arbitrary pull a number out of the hat that you think looks good. So in Harvard, it may be that the road conditions there warrant this lower speed limit. Or nobody's done a recent study since it was widened and relined and everything to show that it really should be 40 or 45. But there are, it's what he outlined was that there is some, and one of the things he put out there was reducing the lane widths, which tends to slow traffic. And once that's done, then going in and doing the traffic study, the speed study to see what that average is, what the numbers look like, and then they can look at setting a lower limit.
So,
but it's a methodical, well-engineered,
yeah, he
very
always has a
purposeful.
Well-engineered answer.
Well, he's an engineer, so I hope so.
But you go by other high schools, they have flashing signs that say
Yeah.
20 miles an hour. It's not, 40 isn't gonna be good enough, so we need to negotiate those things before we give it away.
We can
You can't just accept
we can
what he
discuss
says because he's obviously willing to negotiate. And so I think the Board of Selectmen need to negotiate harder before we move ahead to just give it away the way they want it. It really has to be the way we want it.
well within the limits of the law. Unfortunately.
Yeah,
I mean,
you know,
it's
on
reality,
the actually, I think with the snowbanks, the speed has slowed down slightly. Didn't they do some
Yeah.
preliminary
Yeah.
testing?
They've done some preliminary testing, and the data gathered from that indicate that there would still be more work to be done, but it indicated that it was relatively possible to lower it from 45 to 40. But there are defined criteria that have to be met. It's not arbitrary how you set a speed limit. Speed limits are not negotiable. There is defined criteria that has to be followed to set a speed limit.
Or just say
and
somehow
school
other
zones, there's
towns
no
are doing a
sidewalks
better
there,
job than we
Jonathan.
are.
There's no sidewalks there. There's no students that would be considered, pedestrian students, which factors into it. I mean, yes, there should be signs saying that there's, a school ahead, which should help slow people down, but that's something,
Well, and there's no middle school, and there's no address on 170. I mean, there are factors that for 20 years, people have been trying to negotiate tough with the state and been ineffective at. And I think we've actually seen much more flexibility just in this recent, the last year. And I think we've made progress that for, decades, no one had made any progress. But at the end of the day, the state still is gonna have a lot of control over this road, whether or not town meeting, you know, elects to go forward with the transfer. All right, do we have any other, comments on this issue? No? Do we need a vote on this, or can we wait till we have I guess we'll have votes on the warrant at some point?
You'll have votes on the warrant. Right now, I think what I'll do is put together 3 articles, one for the truck traffic on Wattaquatic, one for both intersections.
All right.
And then when we review the warrant, then we can make adjustments as you like.
Yeah. One other comment, regardless of who owns the road, the state controls the speed limit.
Well, I'd go more broadly, the state controls almost everything, regardless of who's paying the bill.
Right.
As far as setting speed limits, I want to be clear, it's not just 117. The state establishes a speed limit for every road,
Right.
not just a numbered road, every road.
Every road, right, right. Okay.
All right, the next item on our agenda is the consultant's presentation on the regionalization of the public safety dispatch functions for Bolton and Berlin. We're a little ahead of schedule. I don't know, do we have,
Performance, right? Yeah.
I don't know if either of the Berlin selectmen are here. Yep.
No.
all right.
One
you know-
is, but she parked that way down. in the-
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Why don't we wait on that till we have, because the plan was to have, a joint meeting of the two boards of selectmen, so why don't we wait till the Berlin selectmen have joined us, and maybe we could
You want to hear about that?
fill in with the ever-popular report on Minuteman and Town Administrator.
Sure, why not?
We, thank you. We did have a building committee meeting. There's been some tweaking of projected costs for the various options. So I'll just walk you through the table that I have here very, very quickly, hopefully. There are 5 options on the board right now. A total renovation of the existing building, which would be a total cost of $176.5 million, of which the district would pay $105.9 million because of the projected 40% reimbursement from MSBA. And the duration of that project would be 5 years. If we were to do a renovation/addition to the building, it would be $175.3 million to a cost to the district of $105.2, and that project would take 4 years. A new school with demolition would be, so we would demolish the existing building, would be $144.9 million to a district cost of $86.9, which would take 2 3/4 years. If we just did repair with no new ed plan, so meaning just we did repair, we got the building up to code and did really just the basics, the total cost of that is $71.7 million, of which the district would pay $71.7 million because there'd be no MSBA money involved with that. And that project would take 10 years because the building would be occupied during the entire project, so really the only time you could do that is summer and vacations. And then a repair with an ed plan, so we update, I guess I should say, the existing ed plan to comport with the repair to the building. That would be $141.7 million, of which the district would pay $141.7 million, and that would also take 10 years. So those are the 5 options that the school committee and the building committee are looking at right now. And just so people understand the process, the building committee will make a recommendation to the school committee as to which direction we recommend they take. The school committee will then vote on what direction they think the district should take. And then that's submitted to the MSBA, and the MSBA has the final say. We may come up with option A, and MSBA may say, no, we like option C better, and if you want our money, you're gonna go with option C. So they get the final vote because they control the money. So that's where we stand right now on that. If you have any particular questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, that's pretty much what Ed went through it.
It is.
Last
At Tri-Town, the superintendent did that. Also, I should note that they're trying to get presentations done to people in each town within the districts. So I've been asked as the person who's been on the building committee for so long that, that I help coordinate, or actually, well, I'll help coordinate with our school committee rep. A date in March where we would try to, well, we would invite people to come, parents of middle school students, in particular, and the district would take care of that. Selectmen, advisory, whoever, anybody who has an interest, which is every taxpayer in town, to try to get information out to them that's a little bit more expansive than what was presented at Tri-Town. And so I'll be working on trying to coordinate that. The other thing I have under my report is I had really hoped and expected to be able to get the annual town meeting warrant first draft out to you this afternoon. It's done, but Linda and I haven't done one more review of it. Somehow we got distracted by a few other things this week. So it will be out to you before noon on Monday.
Okay.
Mr. Lindsay, you had a comment on the Minuteman?
Yes, the information Don presented tonight is pretty similar to what was presented at the Tri-Town meeting. And it seems clear to me the most cost-effective option is a new school with demolition. But that posits a 50% increase in usage of Minutemen by all the towns in the region. And I think that's pretty unrealistic. And it seems to me there would be some savings in maybe a 25% increase, which I still think is unrealistic, but a little less extremely unrealistic. And maybe it's too late to have that option considered, but I think the most cost-effective option available is going to still build the school a lot bigger than is justified.
But the current, and I'm gonna have to work off the top of my head here, but roughly I think the current in-district population in the current school is 435, somewhere around that. And I think the total overall population is 740 or something like that. So it's a large out-of-district population. The school's being built for, right now the school committee has said they want to build it for 628. So it's anticipating reducing the number of out-of-district placement. And you're right, strictly the in-district placement doesn't come close to covering that. I think it's a combination of, they believe that there'll be some growth, as you said, potentially aggressive growth within the district, but also there will be out-of-district students still attending. If any, it will be more difficult to get in from out-of-district because there'll be fewer seats. And with the agreement that we can enter into intermunicipal agreements, well, the school district can enter into intermunicipal agreements with out-of-district communities to pay for capital costs, which under the current agreement you can't do. It's only the in-district towns that pay for all capital costs. We believe that, that probably will have some slowing of people from inside the district, but I mean outside the district. But if you add it all up, if you add it all up, 628 is probably not an unrealistic number. I don't agree that solely in district will get us to 628. I don't think that's reasonable. So I agree. They picked a number as far as what they see for growth, and whether it's 6% or 4%, who knows right now. I mean, it's just a projection. I think it is slightly aggressive. Whether it's doable or not, as people more knowledgeable than me would know.
If it's a 525 school instead of a 628, which would be a 25% increase in local usage, and there aren't enough places, there aren't a lot of extra places for out of district, we don't care. And the idea of these agreements with other districts, the Minuteman superintendent has been talking about those for at least half a dozen years, and nothing has happened.
I actually worked on a subcommittee that met several times on that in Weston Town Hall, and the commissioner of DESI has agreed that intermunicipal agreements are acceptable by DESI. We've put together 2 different drafts for intermunicipal agreements, one for towns who have never been in the district, another one for towns that have withdrawn from the district but still wish to be sending their kids there. The concept being, we're a former member, former membership should have a little privilege, so they would get first call at seats as opposed to a town that had never been in. So the IMAs are real. They weren't real before, but they are real now.
What I don't think is real is that anybody's interested in signing one with us, with Minuteman.
That I could only conjecture. I couldn't honestly say.
I think if there's one in place, that would put their students higher on the list than people that don't. And with those agreements dangling over people's heads, some of the towns like Watertown that send a very large population may now say, well, if we're paying the capital costs anyway, we might as well be a voting member and look at joining in, which would then bump that percentage up to, almost full enrollment of that. So I think and to your point of making it a smaller school, what programs would you want to cut? Because a lot of that population.
The two least used, I suppose.
Well, and they've done that with reorganizing some of the programs as it is, and putting some new ones in place. But I mean, that's part of what I think kind of what pushed the population or the school size to where it was looking at the size of the different shops and which ones were popular or not, and which ones made sense to continue, and what the minimum school population was that would support those programs.
I do know the school committee had lengthy conversations about exactly what you're talking about, and I can't even try to represent the detail that they went into.
All right, do we have any Berlin Select persons yet? Do we?
The other one's coming around.
Somebody, he was just popping across the street when we pulled up.
Okay.
All right, okay.
We have a seat for you up here.
Yeah, no, Judy, why don't you sort of have a seat, because, I mean, the plan here is, we'll wait for
Thomas.
Tom, but the plan is to get a presentation from Mr. Kennedy. Hi, Tom, we've got a seat for you.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Andrew.
Sorry, it took me a while to park.
Yeah, well, I was just, we actually had, we were waiting for you, but what I thought we'd do is that before we heard from Mr. Kennedy to go through his feasibility study, is that Don Lowe could give us maybe some of the background on how we got to this point, and just sort of briefly explain that. Then I think we'll hear from Mr. Kennedy. The two boards will then have questions for Mr. Kennedy, and then we'll open it up to any questions from the audience. Our agenda had said there would be a possible vote. I know as far as the Bolton, that's not going to happen. I think we're going to, this will be continued to our next full meeting for which will probably be the
March 19th.
19th of March is when we have all three members. And so we're going to devote sort of an hour to this is the plan. And so Don, well, actually, first of all, Mr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Yep. Why don't you can come up, we got a seat for you here as well, but Don, why don't you just sort of briefly explain how Mr. Kennedy's work has come about?
Certainly, and I'll do the best I can to cover all the bases. We first started talking about regionalization in no particularly defined form, I'm going to say probably 2.5 years ago, and it came up actually in discussions during union negotiations under what's now the current contract with the dispatch union, where the current president of the union said, we really need to start thinking about regionalization in some form, because emergency management dispatch is coming. It hadn't come yet, but we knew it was coming as a state requirement. Again, something that we didn't have any say in. And the original concept was, we should look at some area towns and see if we might find some interest in regionalizing with us. And towns that were tossed around at the time, just in conversation, were Berlin or Stowe or Lancaster, pretty much were the original ones that we had thought about. Pretty quickly, Lancaster ended up being in the dispatch center up in Devens. So that wasn't an option. I did reach out to Stowe to see if there was interest out there. There was not. So time went on, and we knew, because of emergency management dispatch, which went into effect July 1st, 2013, that we needed to evaluate how that impacted us. And you know, we worry quite a bit about whether or not we can meet on a regular basis full compliance with what is expected of a dispatch team handling EMD calls. And if you look at what EMD is all about, small towns like Bolton are sorely disadvantaged because we have one dispatcher on per shift. And I think our dispatchers do an excellent job. They work very hard. They do everything they can. So any discussions like this are no reflection on the quality of the work that our dispatchers try to do. The dispatch function has evolved significantly. It's nowhere near what it was 30 years ago, 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. It's a much more complex function. And more is expected of them all the time. And I felt for a long time now that EMD was just another way of the state trying to ease us into regionalization. So either late last February or March, I forget which, I brought a proposal to the selectmen that we apply for a grant from the 911 folks to hire a consultant to do an analysis, a study of Bolton and Berlin joined on with us in agreeing with that, with doing the grant application, to assess 3 possibilities. 1, we do absolutely nothing and we keep the status quo. 2, look at Berlin and Bolton merging together to consolidate our dispatch functions. And 3, Berlin and or Bolton merging with the existing regional dispatch center up in Devens. And the selectmen authorized me to do that. The grant application was submitted, I think April 1st was the deadline. We were awarded about $47,000 to have that study conducted. I sought out different consultants and was very pleased to find someone of Mr. Kennedy's caliber. I'm sure Tom will speak a little bit about his background himself, but he has a lot of experience in this area of doing these types of assessments, and is himself a retired lieutenant colonel from the state police department. So this has been a long time coming. This is not something that just came up a couple of months ago. So it's been quite a road to get here, and now Tom has his findings and his recommendation that he's going to share tonight. Also in attendance, I know we have, I see somewhere, I saw the town administrator from Lunenburg. There she is, right there, Carrie Spidel. I don't know if we have any other visitors. We have Nathan Kenny here, who's the executive director from the Neshoba Regional Dispatch Center. And do we have anyone else here, Tom, that I'm missing?
Chief Denmark was going to be
Chief Denmark, I know Chief Denmark was coming, but I didn't see him come in, so. Okay, so with that's pretty much the background.
All right, okay, well, that was, thanks, Don, we won't use his time against you, so, reset the clock. So,
you know, after Don had contacted me, and you know, I was able to submit a proposal and meet with the team that he had put together, and the team was really made up of you know, the chiefs and their key staff of all of the public safety agencies within Bolton and Berlin. And then very clearly they defined the mission, as Don had said, was to look at those options and is it feasible to consolidate. And the methods that we used, that I used, was I conducted interviews. We did some on-site assessment. The on-site assessment, particularly when it looked at the technology, I did that in conjunction with a very experienced communications engineer to look at the radio systems, the information technology, and the systems in place here in both communities. we looked at all aspects of the operations of within Bolton and Berlin for the communication systems. We were able to assess documents that had been submitted. As an example, is Berlin had quite substantial documentation of their radio systems, so we were able to review all of those. We were able to talk with the existing support that you have, as for an example, with the information technology. They have computer-aided dispatch and records management systems. So we had a chance to talk with the people who support those systems here in both Bolton and Berlin. And very clearly, you know, the mission as has been defined by Dawn to you, you know, we kept it as a very open and transparent process. All of the people that all of the people were involved with the process, the chiefs. I did interviews with all of the people that they had recommended, and that anybody that had an interest. We did one joint meeting where we had a number of police officers, dispatchers, and others that wanted to attend, and we had that as a at a meeting over here at the Bolton Public Safety Facility. So we were able to get their insight, and part of that was talking about the process, and then the other was really receiving information from them about what they thought of all of about the idea of regionalization. We did some 13 single interviews. We did a group discussion with eight of the public safety people here. It was made up of there were 7 police officers, 5 firefighters, 5 dispatchers, and 4 emergency medical services personnel, EMTs. Some of the outcomes, and very clearly that in doing the interviews, we asked what they would be looking for from if there was going to be a regional center. I mean, what are the benefits of regionalizing or the strengths you would see out of regionalization? And very clearly they had some ideas about what they would like to see, and those were the idea was to you know, provide for a more robust center, more dispatches for EMD. You know, Dawn mentioned about the idea of doing EMD. You know, it's a I applaud any dispatcher that's doing that on their own in a setting during a major event, and that they're trying to provide dispatching. I think the standard that has been written in that area, great purposes, but it is very difficult for one person to be able to do that. It's this more robust center. And all of the interviews talked about, you know, the desire of having sufficient personnel to being able to do that, the dispatches, and also to be able to manage larger events. That there would be, they also were looking for a greater economy of scale, taking advantage of new technologies and data analysis tools, the development of dispatcher proficiency. And there wasn't a single person that maligned the dispatch services that are currently in place, any of the people that we talked to. But they also thought that that you know that things could be enhanced in a more robust center. It's a clear focus on dispatching. It's really not doing any of those other responsibilities. Some of the chiefs had an opportunity of going over and listening to a presentation over at the Neshoba Valley, and to see their operation, and very clearly that they saw some differences there. So the things that they were looking for is, you know, those enhanced dispatch services would come from some better training, employee performance, better operational procedures. If you went back 10 years, very little was written in the area of operational guidelines or protocols that that would be written for dispatch services, and, you know, today it's really, it has changed a great deal, the proficiencies and the documentation that's needed in that whole area. And they also thought that there would be a greater ability to have dispatcher career paths. That in a larger center, that there would be more opportunities for a person to be a supervisor, to be a training coordinator, to do those things that they would, there would be more of a future for that person as a career dispatcher. Some of the new technologies that they would be looking for, that really is coming from some of the changes in communications, is really the mapping systems. Today, really quite substantial, and you know, the old adage that about location, as far as the dispatching the right people to the right location is really critical, and that mapping systems is really one of those areas that has been a great deal of changes in this whole arena. At wireless location, you know, the cellular phone systems, they've made progress in it, but it really isn't there. One of my jobs in the state police, in the last in the last 4 years that I was there, we were able to, we had started with a cellular phone system, if you remember Sarah Speak, and it was our desire was to get real-time reporting of incidents on the highway. Ultimately, it became a system that, or a statewide system for cellular 9/11, because there was no alternative. At that time, telephone operators were receiving calls from cell phone users, telephone operators, not emergency dispatchers, and that information. So we accepted those calls. Locations like, of course, at that time there was 60,000 cell phone users in the eastern part of Massachusetts. There's millions. So but the point is, things are evolving in this whole area. It isn't just a couple of those new technologies. There's Next Generation 911. The state, federal government had started a program for Next Generation 911, is really providing the ability to receive information electronically from the social media, from video images, and other electronic systems. And it's they were able to develop the standards. It's being implemented across the country. Massachusetts has just recently released a contract, and so the goal is to have that in place for 2016. There's very few dispatch centers. There are none in Massachusetts. They're doing some testing, but there isn't any place in Massachusetts that if you got on your cell phone and you wanted to send a text to a dispatch center for 911, and I know it's on TV, but it's really not in reality here right now. The plan is to have it in place. So the things are changing. FirstNet is a program that started after 9/11. It was to provide really a broadband, high-speed wireless broadband network across the country, being implemented here in Massachusetts as we speak. Changes are really occurring, both with radio systems as well as the backbone for fiber optic systems to to provide information technology. There's also enhanced operational standards. The operational standards is really one of those areas that I mentioned 10 years ago. Very little written in the area of operational protocols. There is a great deal written today. Massachusetts has, protocols and standards for EMD dispatching, emergency medical dispatching. There's standards that are the National Fire Protection Agency has standards for the time it's going to take for a person in a dispatch center to pick up a phone call and to be able to dispatch the right information. So there's a number of standards that are being written in this whole area. They now accredit dispatch centers. They do it through, there's the Commission on Law Enforcement Accreditation, CLEAR, a number of police agencies have that. Well, there's a separate component now for accrediting dispatch centers. So it's, this has been an evolving area, and most of this has really occurred over the last 10 years. So after we looked at all of the information, you know, we very clearly are making a recommendation that to consolidate Bolton and Berlin into Neshoba Valley. And the three decisions were do nothing, you consolidate Bolton and Berlin, and to ought to go into Neshoba Valley. And the reason why is the things that they were looking for, a more robust center. That's where Neshoba Valley has really a substantial, well, they have a robust center. They have 2 or 3 dispatchers on. They have an ability to expand. They have great leadership. They really are, it's in a short period of time have put together an outstanding center. I've been able to be there on a number of occasions since we started the project. I had not been there before, but I really believe that that is the best recommendation I can make into consolidation. Bolton and Berlin together, it's going to be, each one of the dispatch centers has 1 dispatcher per shift. In Berlin, there's very little opportunity there to expand. Bolton has that ability to have 2 dispatchers. The costs are really, you're just combining your costs. There's really not going to be any cost savings, or very little. And that you're still in that position to ensure that you have the 2 dispatchers per shift. You're going to have that, you're going to, for providing emergency medical dispatching, the best place of being able to do that, I believe, is through Neshoba Valley. We do believe that there would be some cost savings to both communities because of that greater economy of scale. And another consideration is to reduce the cost of future replacement of communications equipment at both the Bolton and Berlin dispatch centers. For an example, over in Berlin, it's the equipment that is in the dispatch center, a great deal of it needs replacing now. You know, to replace that, you know, the radio consoles and other equipment that's in there, you're going to easily spend something in the area of about $250,000 to $450,000 just to replace all of that equipment. Everything has a life cycle on all of that. It's you know, computers in a dispatch center is generally thought about as 3 years. Those are run 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. You're also going to provide the greater ability for information sharing, particularly on the law enforcement side, because you're sharing, although you have a separate database for all of the records for each of the police departments, for Bolton and Berlin, in a regional center, you have a lot of common linkages. So if you have certain patterns of crimes that are occurring, breaking and enterings, they're looking for certain types of cars. You have that ability to have that through, much more so than through a regional center, through the records management systems that are in place. So, and that's really just the start of one of those things. And I'll give you a couple of examples of one of the things that they have in Neshoba Valley is that they were able to look at things regionally. They looked at identifying, putting mobile data terminals in each of the cruisers as well as the fire department. So they looked at it, they sought funds, grant funds to be able to go out, and they saw a gap. They put together a program that, looking at it regionally, so that they were able to put three mobile data terminals in each of the cruises, as well as each of the 3 pieces of apparatus for the fire departments. So there was a great benefit of being able to use that. And another example is they looked at the, one of the common problems, and I have recommendations in there. We're taking a look at the administrative services that are provided by the dispatch center, separate from dispatching. You know, they are the greeters, or the people that come into the station, they look for records. They also do other things like, you know, process burn permits and at least start that process. Neshoba Valley put together an online system, let that be available to all of the communities within Neshoba Valley, the 4 communities there. There really wasn't any additional cost, it was a program that they looked at. They saw a problem and they came up with a solution. So it's an online system for a person to be able to do that. So I do recommend that if you do decide to regionalize with Neshoba Valley or regionalize with each other, it's very clearly you need a good outreach program to your communities. Having done feasibility studies as well as my own responsibilities, a number of years ago I was responsible for coordinating the planning of all of the, when we consolidated the police agencies. And communications is really critical. And, you know, for you, it's communicating within the community as well as with all of the people within all of the public safety agencies and the services that are provided in your communities. And information is really a critical piece. It's you know, I call it an outreach program. It's just letting people know exactly what you're doing, when you're going to be doing it, and to let them know if there's going to be some changes. You know, I see this more of a people issue, as you know, when you consider transitioning out, and mostly because of who's the end user. It's the people in your community as well as the people that are providing the services. Technology is really one of those items that you can there's a technology solution for everything. We know that there are going to be some times of the day and days of the week there's not going to be somebody at the police station, you know, and we were able to come up with a solution, and we had an assessment of the vulnerability assessment for the security of each of the facilities. Those are items that are eligible for funding under the state 911 developmental grants. There's also there are others that go in with that. A common records management system, so that would be implemented here in both of the communities. There's also radio systems that need to be addressed, particularly in the area of addressing some coverage problems within Bolton. That we did have an assessment. It's in the report. We do make that recommendation of developing a plan, and you know, to be able to address some of the administrative functions, as well as utilizing some of the common operational policy and procedures that Neshoba Valley currently uses. They've been able to develop those. It's an ongoing process. And then seeking state funds through the grant cycle. You know, we identified areas of some radio enhancements. You know, to particularly what they do is they were able to tie together the communities through a fiber optic backbone. But there are some other areas for you know, to be able to tie together your radio systems into the Neshoba Valley. They also have security systems where we're able to. That's another eligible funded element of the grant, and that so those are the 3 major areas that we've identified. I did ask Nathan Kenny, and because I did recommend that you know, that both Bolton and Berlin join in their, join the Neshoba Valley Regional Dispatch District. And I'd be more than glad to answer any of your questions, but if it's okay, if invite Nathan Kennedy here, as well as his administrative committee chairman, as well as the operations chairman, if Chief Denmark is here, so that I can make recommendations about how a regional dispatch district works, but the ones who know it best on a day-to-day basis are the people that are actually operating it. So if it's okay if I have Nathan come up?
Sure, no, Mr. Kenny wants to join us here?
Before we start, we'd like to make a couple of comments, just expand off of a couple of things that Tom said.
Sure, I'm sorry, Don, you wanted to make a few points here?
I did. I just want to try to, I just wanted to expand a couple of comments that Tom made. First of all, at the very first meeting that we had, which we had in our public safety building, there was Tom and myself, as well as Chief Alfano, Chief Menser, Margie Diaz, our ambulance director, as well as Chief Galvin and Chief Ricard from Berlin. I wish that we had our medical director, Mark Guttrow, at the first meeting, but Mark has a relatively busy day job, so he can't always be available for things like this, but he did participate in interviews. And while I did run the meeting, we took in the input of every department head that was involved, and I think that they were all five extremely involved, and all five spoke very clearly about what they wanted to see out of the process, and all of their input was taken. And I stressed right from the beginning that the driver for any decision should not be cost savings. You know, if we realize cost savings, that's fine, but what we should be focusing on is how do we, going forward, make sure that we've got the strongest and most flexible possible dispatch function out there to A, support the townspeople, and B, ensure the safety of all of our public safety personnel, our police, our fire, our EMTs. There is no amount of money that's worth saving if you're not providing a proper service to the public and you're not protecting your public safety officials. So I would like to say that. I also would like to say that in none of the interviews that Tom conducted did I participate in. I wanted people to be as free to speak as possible, and I didn't want anybody to feel like there was any inhibition of expressing whatever that they wanted to say. So the only meetings that I sat in were the department head meetings where we would get periodic updates with Tom, and then we received his final report out. So I just wanted to make that clear.
And on that point of the final report, we've got a final report. You've also given it to us in PDF, is that right? And we
Yes.
can put that
We
up.
have it in PDF. It'll be put up on the town webpage Monday morning by noon, so that anybody that wants to access the full report that Tom provided will be able to do so.
All right. Do either of the members of the select boards have questions, either from Mr. Kennedy or Mr. Kenny?
Well, I noticed, obviously, in your report, that there was a summary of the strengths and weaknesses, and obviously, you've articulated well the strengths, and you might want to address for the audience, some of the potential weaknesses and how to overcome those.
I mean, very clearly, I mean, there are a number of weaknesses that were identified, and the importance of that is really to understand what are some of the planning obstacles, the planning goals you need to consider when you identify that, when you're thinking about that. And those are really when you put together your transition plan, that this is one of those considerations. There are no obstacles that I saw in any of those weaknesses that were expressed to me that would be impediments to being able to regionalize. Those are very important things. As an example is many of them I was able to make recommendations, you know, to, as part of the planning process. As an example is the outreach, and, you know, one of the things is that nobody knows our town like our dispatchers, and in different words, but that's exactly what they were saying, and there's a great validity to that. In transition planning, you know, you identify exactly what you want a dispatch center to know, you know, as far as location, and we have a number of times you identify things by something that we've always called it, not the intersection of 117 and Main Street or some other roadway, and it's a, you know, part of that is the transition planning, that, you know, that is ongoing, and so that's why we have some recommendations on that. So the obstacles, the impediments that were identified by the weaknesses, those generally, those were put into the area of recommendations for me.
Right, and certainly if we were to hire any new dispatcher, they would need to learn just like any other dispatcher.
Every police officer that comes into town is gonna learn.
Right.
Even somebody that grew up in town, they really don't know the town like the officers that are driving around, you know, on patrol every day. And every firefighter, you know, that gets hired in town, although they know most of the areas, but there's always an orientation program that they're gonna go through. And that's exactly how they do that.
Yeah. No, I actually, I read the report last night, and I read it again this afternoon, and I think you did a very good job in terms of, you know, the analysis of the structure and weighing the pros and cons, and, you know, outlining the strengths and the weaknesses.
Thank you.
Excellent from that perspective.
Nathan, if you wanted to mention anything about how you were transitioning the communities, you know, the 4 communities that you did transition.
When you're looking at a transition of our town to go into a center, and when we were setting up Neshoba Valley, we were tasked with doing all 4 at once. And so one of the things that you focus on is knowledge of the town is the most important thing. The technology falls into place. You have to work out some of those technical bugs as they go through, but it's the knowledge of the community, it's the knowledge of what the towns want to see happen. That was our largest challenge. And we met twice a week with the dispatchers, and we would go over introductions from each dispatcher, and then we actually tasked them with actually bringing their town to us. Who better knew those communities than the dispatchers currently working in Lunenburg or working in Lancaster? So we would have them do presentations to us to not only refresh themselves, but to teach us how their town is in existence, how they run, what are some of the formalities that we need to know, what are the town geography quirks that we need to become familiar with. Then as the operations board and I met and ironed out a lot of the policies and procedures, we would incorporate that as well. So it was a real team learning environment, and that's the only true way to really bring a town into the fold, is to treat it as that team environment.
Any other?
I'm good. I'm good.
No?
I have a question.
Could you, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
at some point, could you just explain how the center is governed and how the different towns are represented in different ways?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that one.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Sure. Neshoba Valley is governed by a board of administrators, which is currently made up of each town's town administrator or town manager. They represent the community. We meet monthly, we go over any topics to be discussed during that meeting. When I write the annual budget, that's why I present the budget to for approval. They all have a say into how that budget is drafted, and they take that budget back to their communities for approval from there. We are also governed by a board of operations chiefs. Those are one fire chief and the police chief from each community come in. We meet periodically and review policies and procedures, how things are going. You know, policies and procedures it's a living, breathing document. You're constantly making changes to these. Things that you set up back in 2013 that you thought would work didn't necessarily work as smoothly as you thought. So we're tweaking them as we go to imply that we're getting a smoother transition aspect and to make sure that the center's running as efficiently as it possibly can. Then I fall in underneath those 2 boards, and I run the day-to-day operations of the center.
How are the costs allocated?
I'm sorry?
How are the costs allocated?
We do a shared cost, so at the bottom number, we divide that equally by 4.
And so you divide it by 6 if two new
Correct.
towns join?
Correct.
Do you have other towns other than Bolton and Berlin that you know are thinking about it or expressing interest?
No, we had met previously with the town of Shirley. They invited us in to do a Board of Selectmen's meeting, but I have not gone out and solicited any communities, nor have I had. In this instance, I was contacted by the consultant at the time to come and get Neshoba involved in the project, which I brought to my admin board for approval to become involved. We sent a letter of attestation, just like your communities did, to participate in this site.
If we go with Neshoba, would you be hiring more dispatchers?
Yes.
Any more board questions? All right, well, no, at this point, I'll open up to questions from the audience, and I guess I just remind everyone to just identify yourselves before asking your question, and this is all being recorded on Bolton Access TV, which will be, it's available on their channel and on YouTube.
I'm Mary Ann McLaughlin. I'm the president of the Dispatchers Union. Just a couple follow-ups to those last 2 questions. When you divide that budget by 4 or potentially 6 towns, does that mean that a small town like Bolton would be paying equal costs to a town like Lunenburg?
Yes.
It has a higher population and a higher public?
Yes. Yep, that's a shared cost basis, fair and equitable across the board. We don't divide it up by population like some communities do.
And how many new dispatchers do you plan on adding on?
I would have to go over the call volumes and to see what the increases would be. The first time I got Bolton's call volumes report was in here, so that's something we'd have to discuss with the admin board and go from there.
Okay. And do you have mapping software?
It's part of IMC. It's part of the program that we have. We do not have AVL, if that was your question.
Paul Anthony, Angley Sugar Road. Would the present dispatchers from Bolton and Berlin be given preference?
Yes.
And then the
When we set up the center, one of the things that we did is we posted internally only for those positions. In this instance, whatever number is determined, we would do the same thing and do just internal. If something didn't work out, then we would have to look external, obviously, to fill those positions. But we would do primarily just internally.
Sir?
Hank Stocky, Vice President of the Police Union. I heard some of those things there that it seems that we're duplicating in the regional from what we already have. We use INC. The grants that would be available for all of the radio stuff, we could apply for ourselves. So a lot of those things, those benefits, we could also have in our own station house. The technologies that are coming along, the mapping software, those things would be coming through from the state. We would be able to apply for those and get those through the state. The upgrades to 911, those come from the state. They've been coming from the state for a while. So a lot of the technology, I mean, if they're using the same technology as we're using, and the state is providing the same technology to us as they would provide to them, I don't see the benefits of doing the regionalization.
One correction, when it comes to the capital grants, which is the development grants, you can apply for a feasibility study money, which is what this is here, but the actual equipment aspect of it, you have to be a regional center. Or a regional PSAP, per se. You can't just be a single, center.
Are you talking about like Next Gen 901?
Yeah,
Next Gen 901.
Yeah, Next Gen is something, but you had made a comment about using some of the capital money for radios. You can do some of that through the incentive grants, not a lot of it, but you can do the majority of those capitals through the development grant. When Mr. Kennedy had talked about the mobile data terminal project that we're just finishing up now, that's how we secured those fundings, was through that development grant.
See, there's a great interest on the part of state to regionalize 911, and part of that is the infrastructure they're putting in place. The next generation 911 is We're very unusual in that we have over 240 dispatch centers in the state. Most states have a very small number. New Hampshire's got 2 for 911.
The whole state?
The receipt of 911. There's, Rhode Island has 1. California's got 30, I think, or 34. So we're very unusual in the number of dispatch centers. And when they started to analyze this, and I read a report that came out of the Federal Communications Commission, and when they started to do the planning of Next Generation 911, and they looked at the number of dispatch centers across the country. And remember, we're very different here. We have a lot of very small, generally 1 dispatcher centers, and they were looking at nationwide. Their plan encompassed reducing the number of dispatch centers across the country. Here in Massachusetts, one of the reasons why they have been able to promote the developmental grants, that Nathan mentioned about the capital costs for radio systems and other infrastructure, that's part of their desire to make it more economical, as well as provide more enhancements within these centers. So it's if you were planning this from scratch today, you wouldn't necessarily plan this many centers across the state.
Do you feel that the grant money is still gonna be around since the state is in a big deficit? Is this?
I can't answer that question.
Yep.
Mark Cotreau, Fox Run Road. I'm actually the medical director for Bolton, and actually for Berlin, and for Lancaster.
An example of regionalization.
And I'm actually a strong proponent of regionalization. I understand that the principal reason for regionalization of the communication center is the introduction of EMD, emergency medical dispatch. And I understand and fully agree with the idea that properly doing EMD is very, very difficult for a single dispatcher in a single center. I've actually given this question a lot of thought. I spoke at length with Mr. Kennedy. I know Bolton Dispatch very well, Berlin less well. I've been there less time. I know Neshoba Valley actually pretty well. And I'm also the medical director for Worcester, so I know them quite well. And I see advantages and disadvantages to both concepts. My first job when I was 16 was as a fire and EMS dispatcher for the town of Saugus. We didn't do EMD back then. We didn't have computers, actually, back then. But one of the things that strikes me is that there are both advantages and disadvantages to size. And from working as a dispatcher in a town, and from working as an EMT and as a paramedic on the North Shore, for the law enforcement officer in the street, for the EMT and the paramedic in the street, the person at the other end of the radio was extremely important and actually could make and break a shift. And so I understand that there are states that have single dispatch centers, and I'm not clear as to whether they're single 911 call receiving centers that then send a call to more local dispatch centers, or whether they also do the actual dispatching of the services. But I'm in a position of, knowing sort of the communities involved, knowing the dispatch centers involved, and having a very, very difficult time even coming up with a recommendation in my own head. I've actually discussed this at length with my other medical director colleagues, and a lot of the decision will, in my mind, should revolve less around a perceived savings and cost, and I agree with the town administrator on that, and a lot more on how the system will actually function at the level of the call and the people providing the service for that call. I think that Neshoba Valley actually works extremely well, and there was a lot of concern that it would do so among some of the people in Lancaster. I have heard very few, if any, complaints since then. But I also recognize that culture matters and geography matters, and knowledge. Not only we spoke of geography, knowledge of geography, and that, quite frankly, is solvable with technology. But knowing who you're working with also matters, and I would just recommend that that also be kept in people's minds when the decision is made.
Thank you. Mr. Lindsay?
I'm appalled we'd even be considering this if there aren't any significant cost savings. I think there's real advantage to the local knowledge. I recall driving home on Berlin Road a few years ago, and all of a sudden 3 horses come running at me. So I called dispatch, and the dispatcher said, well, given where you are, those will be so-and-so's horses. And I'll give her a call and she can go out and get them. Well, no regional thing is going to be able to respond with that kind of efficiency. There's a real local kind of thing here. And if we can't save money, I just can't see giving that up. Also, I worry that we will not only not save money, I think ultimately this will cost us more. This is just like regionalizing the schools. We've lost control of 5/8 of our budget, and we're later going to talk about how gruesome that's going to be for us this year. These folks are wonderful people, but they have a very narrow focus on providing the best dispatch service that can possibly be provided. And they will spend whatever money they think needs to be done to do that, and they will bill us. And I think it'll be, as I say, just like the schools. We'll have no voice in this. We'll have lost this part of our budget for any kind of control, and it will turn out to be more expensive. And finally, the idea that Bolton is going to pay the same share, or even Berlin, which has fewer people, for towns that have way more calls than we do, just seems ridiculous to me. It should be based, I think, on the number of calls from the town, and you could, look back 12 months or something and have it a little every year, the way some of these regional school assessments are done. But I just think without a significant cost savings up front, this is a real non-starter.
We haven't been focusing on the cost savings, but why don't you explain, Mr. Kennedy, how your numbers came out with regard to Bolton, for example, on the costs?
I mean, between Bolton and Berlin, there were some savings if there was going to be a standalone center. There's going to be much more so with savings going into the Neshoba Valley, and then for both future performance for the regional center as well as cost savings. We mentioned about they share the costs with 4 communities. It's not an incremental cost for each community that they add in once they have their core established. And then, so now you're sharing those costs 6 ways. So, that's where you're going to get substantial reductions.
Sure. So it looks, as I read this, you were estimating that by going with Neshoba Valley, Bolton would save annually a little more than $100,000 a year, whereas if we did just a Bolton Berlin center, we would actually cost us more, another $4,000 a year. And I gather that's the function of the fact you'd have 2 dispatchers in that combined center rather than our single dispatcher.
That's right.
All right. And then just to sort of fill out the Berlin savings, it looks like from your report, it's about $77,000 a year. When you ran those numbers, were you Did you backfill for the, having to have some individual at the front desk during business hours at the police station, or how are you contemplating that would be handled?
How I analyzed that, it was really calculating out the number of dispatchers that you wanted on duty, making some judgments on everything from your fringe benefit, because if you were gonna have 2 dispatchers on duty at a Bolton Berlin center, really what's the cost of that, using some of your current labor costs? And then you're able to, we have a formula that we follow on that, we're able to calculate that in, as well as some of your existing costs for for the technology licensing for the CAD records management system, and other costs that are like that. The vast majority of the costs are labor costs. I think there's around 93% of them, and it's really gonna be labor costs, so. My belief is that you can manage those labor costs much more efficiently in a regional center, where you're sharing those costs 6 ways.
Quick question for Nathan, is Neshoba Valley staffed at the same level 24 hours a day?
No, we actually have a 24-hour permanent part-time that comes in 3 days a week, our 3 busiest days.
Okay.
We run monthly reports. What's our busiest day, what are our busiest hours? Right now, we tend to track our busiest hours of the day are 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. So we'll staff up for those 3 days. And then obviously, any storm that's predicted to come in, we obviously staff up appropriately and get everybody situated.
I think one of the things that we're kind of glossing over is the customer service that the dispatchers provide to the town. And I know they were mentioned in the recommendation, but I think that's not giving justice to the job that the dispatchers do, connecting the community to the different services within the town. They are off-hours highway, they're off-hours tree warden, they're off-hours everybody else in town. How many times the dispatchers are the communication link for that? Not to mention the administrative duties that they perform on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. Can they be absorbed, or are we gonna have staffing increases? Again, $100,000 in cost. If you add a staff or 2, one that has to sit at the desk, to be the presence at the station 8 hours a day, or maybe even 16 hours a day, like Lancaster's doing. That's, you're chewing into your savings, and again, I go back to, if we can provide all of those services for no incremental cost, and the customer service piece, we don't have a plan for, because that's really important to the town of Bolton. They really expect the customer service out of the public safety personnel, whether that's dispatchers, police officers, EMTs. They expect that, and I wish there were more people here to talk about that, because we get a lot of different calls for, my electricity's out. What's the number for National Grid? We had the horse call already. People, that is what they expect from us, and that's a big hurdle for you folks to overcome in communicating that service is no longer going to be provided. Who's going to come down and go to the lockbox and take the key out so that people in town can use the training center? Who's going to handle giving the key out to the schools so the kids can play basketball in the wintertime? Who's going to do all of those things when there's nobody there? Police officers are going to come in off the road. They're not going to be on the road. It may take 2 hours for the guy who needs the key to the gym for basketball because 2 officers are tied up. How do we handle those things? That's a customer service nightmare, as far as being able to service the community for the things that they've gotten used to and expect from the public safety facility and personnel.
Mr. Lindsay.
Yeah, I have misunderstood on the cost savings, obviously. $100,000 is worth considering.
That we can agree.
I will miss the local flavor of the service, because I do agree with what was said, both by me and the union vice president. But if in fact, this can really save $100,000, which somehow didn't come through to me in the presentation at all, then I think it is worth considering. I am still bothered, however, by the one charge to every town. I really think we should push a little on that and see if that can't be revised.
Ben?
Jerry Wilson, I'm the deputy fire chief here in Bolton, but I am a Lancaster resident, part of the Neshoba Valley agreement right now. Nate, do you know what Lancaster's savings was on the regionalization deal?
I don't off the top. I believe it was something like 30, 35 when it came down to it. Is that true?
$20,000 is what the town of Lancaster saved by regionalizing. So the 100,000, I don't know how the number came about, but I would really want the select board to really fine tune, comb that number. Because that's not what was proposed in the Lancaster town meeting. That's what our realization between last year's budget and this year's budget has been.
Well, it sounds though that Lancaster's bill would go down if Bolton and Berlin were to join.
Actually, the our first budget is, excuse me, our second budget that was just written is $200 less than the first one that we wrote in the first year.
Can you address how other towns handle not having a dispatcher?
It's really up to each individual community how they want to handle their public safety building or their police station, shall we say. You know, for instance, how Harvard did it is 2 dispatchers that did not come over to the center. They decided to hire them. One is now the police chief secretary, and they use the other one as a greeter that sits in the old dispatch center and answers the door during the daytime. During the evening hours, when there's not somebody there, we have a video camera feed direct to the front door that we can buzz people in, communicate with them via a direct line telephone. The door secures behind them, and then what we can do is have an officer come back to take a report, or a lot of times they'll leave the accident reports or some kind of a form in the lobby for them to grab, and so that we can direct them to where those forms are if that's what they're looking for.
Will you give them directions when they pick up the phone?
Yeah, we have directions built into the IMC system.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that we've done. Lunenburg actually did a great job, and theirs is the base. So we built it out in the first year for all the other communities as well.
All right.
Okay, I have a few things. I still am not clear on the $100,000 estimated savings. Does the study include, I'm sorry, because I haven't seen the study, does the study include paying somebody to be at the Bolton's dispatch window? Does that $100,000 include the prisoner watch that dispatchers do? Does that include the loss of grant money where that would then have to be replaced by operational costs? Does that consider dispatch administrative duties? I guess I need to know what that $100,000 really means. Is it truly $100,000, or are some of these assessments gonna come after this is in place?
This is for dispatch services. Now, those, other responsibilities of, having somebody Monday through Friday within certain hours of the day, I know that talking with Chief Alfano, he has some ideas, and that's why I make a recommendation, develop a plan to address some of those administrative functions. And he has in his mind about how he would implement that, and that, to address some issues. He was talking about bringing his records function into the old dispatch area, that he'd be able to, that was just one of the ideas that he was talking about. So each community that does this, really needs to think about what services that they really want to provide at those windows and doors, and really how are they going to, if those aren't calculated in as savings, some of it is just realigning some of the things that you currently do. If I know some stations, actually, you know, they have some administrative hours that are, at, you know, you let the people know in the community, certain hours of the day and the days of the week, that they can go to the station. You know, they've done everything from having an administrative person that happens to be there, that takes care of those during those hours. But it really, every community has a list of all of those items, and, you know, I put a list of all of the items, some of those other administrative duties that both Bolton and Berlin do, you know, and I think it's very important to be able to, you know, to take a step back and think about some of those things that you really want to do, and how are you gonna do them. The police chiefs, and, you know, in both Bolton and Berlin, you know, they both had ideas about that. You know, they're both innovative leaders, and, you know, that they have, you know, that they have some ideas about how they would accomplish that.
Again?
Oh, yes, and still, yeah. Another question I have is, in the cost analysis of the salaries, is that based on 2 dispatchers in the Berlin Bolton Center around the clock? Because I'm not sure we'd even need 2 dispatchers around the clock, especially on midnight, so we could cut out an entire second person's salary and benefits in that cost analysis. Because it's rather quiet. Sometimes the phone doesn't ring at all at night in either town. Most nights. So I mean, so that would diminish that $100,000 figure. I would think significantly.
You had,
You know, I, very clearly, when I did the interviews, you know, the desire was to have the 2 dispatchers on duty for doing EMD and other large events. And so I built all of the staffing on 2 dispatchers on duty for the 2 towns. You know, I mean, very clearly, there are nights in both towns it's quiet. But, you know, who's gonna predict when the crash occurs? You know, that's the benefit of regionalization, is that, you know, you're gonna have events that are gonna be happening over a 6-town area, and there's 3 of the towns gonna be really quiet, 3 of the towns gonna be very busy, or vice versa. Maybe there's only 1 very busy on a particular night. So but you have the staff to be able to realign them, you know, depending on who's very busy that night. You know, guarantee you, and within the 6 towns, you can have somebody that's gonna be busy. So, but are they all gonna be busy in one night? I doubt it.
no, no one else is raising their hand, so you get another bite at the apple here.
Thank you. And another concern I have, actually, I guess I would throw this out more to the residents of Bolton, is that this town invested in the state-of-the-art communications center. And my understanding was that was built with the intent for expansion. And we were in support of regionalization, and I think we always thought in our mind that it would come to us. So the town is paying for that room that would no longer be in use. And about a year and a half ago, the town also invested $35,000 in EMD software that we couldn't take with us because Nathan uses a different company than we use. So that would be another cost that's been incurred that would not, you know, the town would have paid for, that we would no longer be using. I guess, you know, residents would have to look at this and decide if, you know, saving $5 a month on their tax bill is worth the loss of all these services. Because I know we keep talking about the cost. I was at a meeting last week where we were talking about state 911 grant funding. The state 911 department had intended on raising the taxes on our landline tax. Governor Patrick did not sign off on that bill before he left office. And as you know, Governor Baker has said no new taxes, no new fees. He has yet to sign off on the increase on those taxes. And talk is that the state is not going to be fulfilling all those grants. They may be taking the support and incentive grant off the table next year because they have to fund Next Gen 911. The increase on the taxes was going to fund Next Gen. Next Gen is supposed to roll out July 1, 15 and be in place by July 116. So I'm wondering, Tom, and maybe you know the answer to this, is there going to even be money to apply for grants for regionalization consolidation?
Actually, yes. The governor has approved. Now, I'm not sure if these are an increase of a fee, but he's approved of the bonding, you know, for the capital expenses for the, you know, that would be necessary to implement next generation 911. That's a separate issue than, you know, raising the you know, the fee. Because state 911, they receive the funds, and it's by statute law that it's only can be used for the 911 system. So that they provide a variety of grants. You know, we've talked about the developmental grants. There are other grants, there's training grants, that there are incentive grants. That the most significant one is the developmental, and that's where you can get into the infrastructure. The fee you pay on your cell phone use, you know, there's a charge on that. There's a 911 charge that you see in your phone bill. That's set aside into a designated fund. It can only be used for 911, and that you know, the information that I saw just 2 days ago was that there's a decision that's been made by the governor. Those funds are going to be available, and in particular the developmental grants. So the money is going to be there. Nathan may know something different, but
No, you're right.
but that's
So, we started the conversation with understanding that there were three options. One is to do nothing, and stay the way we are. One is to regionalize between two towns, and one is to regionalize with Neshoba. I agree that I think that staying individual is probably the least attractive option, because the point of regionalization from an EMS point of view is to facilitate emergency medical dispatch. Very, very hard to do with a single dispatcher. The reason that emergency medical dispatch has become the standard is that it actually does save lives. Pre-arrival instructions, instructing people on how to do CPR over the telephone does save lives. And quite frankly, as advanced as Massachusetts tends to be in healthcare in general, we are very, very late to this dance. Pretty much everyone else in the country has been doing this for much, much longer than we have. It occurs to me, though, that we don't necessarily have to, we're not rejecting one option by accepting the other. I'm wondering what the sunk cost would be, or what the barriers would be to starting with regionalizing the two towns, seeing how that worked, and then if we decided that the downsides did not materialize as much as we had anticipated, and the benefits didn't materialize as much as we had anticipated, we still have the option of further on down the road, furthering the regionalization into a larger center. I just came from a discussion just before this meeting with IT at UMass, where they very strongly warned into trying to revamp our entire information system all at once, but progressing actually slowly over a 2 to 3 year period, and avoiding the risk of too big too fast.
I think the consultant mentioned that there would be a significant cost to Berlin. Even if, whether they don't do anything or whether they join with us, there's still a significant cost to Berlin to upgrade the equipment that they have in their facility.
But if the equipment was here, I mean, Bolton, to my understanding, already has the infrastructure capable of being a dispatch center for both towns. So if dispatch would basically run out of Bolton, what would be the cost of, or what would we lose from perhaps 5 years down the road saying, we're ready to talk about the next step?
Well, maybe the question should be framed, why did you recommend both towns going to Neshoba as opposed to the option of Berlin joining with Bolton?
Sure. I mean, part of that is there's an existing structure in a regional center at Neshoba. It is very robust. It's been very well led. They have infrastructure there that can be expanded. They can add additional communities there. They have a lot of these existing systems for a regional center in place. Now, some of the costs associated with if you were going to, Bolton and Berlin were going to do it, they would have to apply for a grant. Now, the likelihood of getting grant funding through a larger center, remember the goal of, the state is to regionalize the number of these centers. And, 2 communities like Bolton and Berlin going on their own to seeking those funds, what happens with the grant funds is they go before a committee. A lot of that is rated, and, so your chance of getting those funds may not be as great as getting it with a larger center. This generally what you're gonna run into if you Bolton and Berlin, there's gonna be some costs, and it'll be about $140,000 for an IT CAD records management software package. You would have some costs associated with a server and computers at the dispatch center. You would have security at Berlin, because if you went to, because I would recommend Bolton, because of the things that Mary Ann mentioned, that it is set up. Can't be a tremendously large center, but you certainly can have 2 or 3 dispatches in there, quite efficiently. So you're gonna have some radio connectivity issues between the 2 towns, so you could probably, really just estimating it. I know that the CAD records management would be about $140,000. You would have some radio issues, and you would have security. So all told would be $250,000 to $300,000 of capital expenses.
Mark actually made a comment that I hadn't thought of, which is starting smaller and then growing larger. But as a former grant writer in a past life, I started thinking about something. If we did, for example, start Berlin and Bolton together, and we got whatever we got from the development funds in grant money, whatever that may be, and then for whatever reason we said, for whatever reason this isn't working out. I do know that you can't go back to your loan again. That's stated right out front. But would the 911 folks be open, in your opinion, to investing more grant money to do another migration when we've already done one?
I would say no. You're going to be competing against a number of communities that are in the same process. And give you an example. They allocated $8 million for developmental grant funds. They had about $24 million of grant requests. So what they end up doing is they prioritize all of that, and you're competing with the other communities. And their ultimate goal is to have fewer larger regional centers, cities having their own centers.
Mark, I'll let you finish up this point, but even with the extension of time, to back out Don's talk, we're over here, and we do have some other business to get to.
One last question, forgive me my naivety, but why is the state so interested in very few large centers rather than several small efficient centers?
I'd only be guessing. I mean, because I don't run those. I mean, these are my own observations. I mean, if you put yourself in the position of the state, and they're gonna be providing all of this infrastructure into how many centers we're gonna be doing. You know, the 240 probably isn't the most efficient way of being able to do that. You know, is it gonna be 80 or is it gonna be 100? You know, if I was in that position, you'd wanna be thinking about that. You know, so you know, the cost of the infrastructure is some of the most initial significant costs. After that, it's gonna be, you know, your ongoing or recurring costs, which is primarily labor.
All right, thank you. Mark just reminded me, we have the Lunenburg town administrator, who I think is probably in a unique position, having sort of gone through this. So I don't know if you want to speak to this as a town that went from its own dispatch center to Neshoba Valley, what your experience was.
Okay, I'd be happy to. We spent years having meetings like this, and you know, we're not here to sell you on our operation. We're very happy with it, so I'm hesitant to jump up and get into the discussion. Lunenburg is the largest community in the regional dispatch district, so we do get the best bang for our buck, as some people have pointed out. I think all of the things that we thought about and contemplated are the same things that are being addressed here. We did not look at it as a cost savings opportunity. It really was a cost avoidance for us. Because we are so large, we ran almost all of our shifts with one dispatcher, and with the EMD requirements, we were forced to be in a position where we would have to have two dispatchers. So it was a huge cost for us to be able to meet the requirements of emergency medical dispatch. So we looked at it from that perspective. I can tell you that we did save about $100,000 going into the district, and every penny of that and more has gone back into public safety. So we didn't take it and give it to schools or DPW or anything else. One thing that we did learn, as has been mentioned here, is the tremendous administrative support that dispatch provided, particularly to the police department. And as a couple of your staff members mentioned, that's something you do have to be aware of, and you have to have a plan to address that. So we went from having dispatchers as our only 24/7 personnel in our public safety building. And we have a combined police fire public safety building. So we went from having that to not having that, and we had to come up with a plan to address it. And what we've done is we've hired a police officer who is a desk officer. We have coverage in our budget for 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. We don't have regular coverage on the weekends. We have one full-time uniformed desk officer, and we have reserve officers that fill in the additional 4 hours per day. There are pluses and minuses to that. So we don't have the full-time coverage. We don't have regular coverage on the weekends. The desk officer is able to perform lots of duties and things that dispatchers couldn't do, things that you have to have a uniform officer do. The desk officer also monitors lockup. We never had dispatchers monitoring lockup, so we moved all of the monitoring equipment into where our dispatch was, and the uniformed officer is able to monitor from lockup. I think, you know, one of the things that was mentioned, maybe not talked about so much, is you have to be able to address residents' concern that you're able to provide the same level of dispatch service from a remote location. I think people just naturally feel that they get a better service if the service is provided within the community. So that's something that you have to be able to address. I would encourage anybody to talk to any of our police officers or firefighters in the town of Lunenburg. If you have friends, relatives, talk to them and see what they think. We've been at this for a little over a year and a half. Visit our center, you can see what we've done. In Lunenburg, we have a phone that is set up, and it's monitored by regional dispatch. We have the building locked when there's no personnel in there, and they can unlock the building from the regional dispatch center to let people in while they wait for us to call an officer in for service. Visit the regional dispatch center, and you can easily feel very comfortable that they have everything under control. I think that's something that anybody should do, residents, elected officials. I think that would be an important thing to do. It's not been easy. We were the first community to transition, so we've been through a lot. It was a big learning process for us, but Nathan has done a great job. All of our dispatchers that wanted a job at the regional dispatch center got a job at the regional dispatch center. That was important, and I'm sure that's important to both communities, that if they don't go, then you have unemployment costs that you have to build in at least for the first year, so that's something to consider. But I think it's been a good move for us. It's allowed us to meet the requirements of emergency medical dispatch. And again, all of our savings, and we had the same savings in the second year as the first year, it all went into public safety.
All right, well, thanks very much. That's very helpful. Thank you. Mr. Kennedy, can you rejoin us? We're on, is it March 19th?
Yeah, March 19th.
March 19th at 7 o'clock when we'd be probably talking about this again. Are you gonna be available?
I think that's the day I come back from vacation. I'm gonna have to get to Dawn.
All right.
I think it's the night of I come back the 19th, and
Yeah.
I'll talk with you tomorrow.
Okay, our plan is that that's the sole agenda for the evening. That's sort of an off meeting, but that'd be the only agenda topic that night.
Okay. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Bolton Board and Administrator. It's a lot to take in. Thank you. Yes.
Well,
Thanks for joining us. Oh, yeah.
all right. There was a pipeline meeting at your, yesterday,
there you go. Oh, absolutely. Thanks for coming. Yes, thank you.
Easy one.
See you again.
Yes, nice to see you. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
I saw them in here.
Good night.
I said, I come in.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah. Peter, come on up. Our next item on our agenda is the Ross, the request to release Chapter 61A property owned by Peter and Helen Ross on Norse Road. I gather you have about 10.4 acres in 61A that you intend to take out of 61A, and so as a result are offering it to town at fair market value. And both the planning board and Concom, I guess Concom in particular, noticed that it's beautiful land, but it's not land that they thought the town ought to be purchasing at this point. So I think I'd be inclined to take their lead on this issue. Any questions, comments?
Get you back on the agenda.
Yeah, well,
We appreciate that.
it's a lost cause. It,
No discussions, I move that we approve, request to release the, land from, 61A.
I'll second that.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye? All right. Thanks for waiting.
It's always interesting, very entertaining.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right?
you.
The next item on our agenda is a discussion to extend the contract with Metro West CD, and this is with the Affordable Housing Trust. And I see we have members here. Why don't you pull up chairs?
Gentlemen, how are you tonight?
Don't want to be mistaken for a Berlin selectman.
There are worse things.
Bolton Selectmen.
Bolton's, or,
That's true. So what can we do for you, gentlemen?
Well,
What are we getting out of this
welcome to
contract?
6 of us that have never seen a screw. We had a meeting about a month ago and reviewed what was done over the past year by the Metro West Collaborative in monitoring and creating a very good detailed analysis of our affordable housing in the town that we really didn't have, which was great. They did everything they set out to do. They did it with 2/3 of the hours that they said they would do, which is pretty rare that anything comes in under. And we were pretty impressed and thought that we should re-up for another year. Initially, we signed up for 2 years, but we said we would look at it at the end of the first year. It's really, the level of detail that they go into is much more than, any volunteer or anybody would do on our level.
Oh, yeah, no, I saw they're drilling down on the status of individual units and.
And identified some units that were in jeopardy and,
Yeah.
and
That's good.
the good news is that out of our 64, I think there were maybe 4 that had a problem.
Yeah.
Which is, not a high number, maybe 10%, but it still tells you that there's an issue, and if there isn't somebody working on that, which again, we don't really have anyone in the town to be able to do that.
It's quite fair to say we never would have detected this.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
DD research alone is just hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, no, I know they picked up a refinancing or something
Yeah.
that had happened on a unit
There's
without a.
3 units that have put their deeds into trust,
Mhm.
and we've found through the Metro West that is not allowed.
Mhm.
Several different flavors of affordable status. So.
All right, well, no, it does seem like they're sort of adding value there. I noticed on the chart though, how many lots do we have that are in the pipeline? Because they're not units, but we know that they're sort of out there. I know at Century Mill, and it was at Houghton Farms. Do you know offhand how many?
Houghton Farms is just one lot.
Just one?
I don't know.
It might be 3 at Century Mill, but it's a ways off.
So we have 4 lots that have been,
Gifted.
in an agreement, will be given to the town.
Okay.
Once these developments are built out.
Mm-hmm.
And those are lots that we can either choose to try to build affordable housing on, or frankly, we've talked in the past about selling the lots and using the money towards affordable housing somewhere else. So we do still have that option open. I think probably
from what I'm seeing, Century Mill is, you know, moving along to where we'll probably see something there before we will in Houghton, although the Houghton developer was willing to do it up front. So, you know, we went down the path a few years ago looking at trying to do something with Habitat, and that didn't work out. So those are actually, I think, you know, relatively near term. There'll be something that we'll need to decide what we want to do on. There are also some other affordable units that are not in the pipeline that, you know, could and should come to be when developments move forward in other parts of town. The Sugar Road development had, I think, 15. I think it might be resized to a smaller number, but that would be a significant number there too. Right. And the village overlay allows for potential for any developments there to have some as well.
All right.
We're at 3.7%. You know, the state threshold is 10%, so we're not, you know, we're not
They
anywhere
need
near.
another 60 units or
We're
something
not
to
anywhere
do
near
that.
threatening that. I don't see that happening in the near future.
Yeah.
So we continue to be in the situation that we've been in the past, which is that if somebody wants to come into our town and propose a 40B, you know, we can't prevent it. But obviously the housing market has significantly changed from what it was 10 years ago to where that pressure isn't there.
Doug, just as an FYI, you referenced Habitat a few years ago. I actually met with the new executive director for the area today, and she referenced that what makes it difficult for them, I guess, is that is the cost of doing the septic and the well on top of everything else when they have about, I think, roughly $150,000 to work with per project, and that normally goes in to the structure itself. But they, just as an FYI, and to start to get the word out, they are willing to put some funds into the town for distressed properties, for lack of a better word, with the properties who would, owned by people who could income qualify, that maybe they might need a new roof or something like that, and they're very interested in doing that. Erica joined us for the meeting, and we're gonna work with the senior center and with the Friends of Bolton Seniors to try to get that word out and try to make some connections there. So while we may not have a near-term opportunity for them in that area, I think I'm kind of excited about the prospect of helping a couple of seniors.
Yeah, that's a great opportunity. I know a year ago we did that in Bolton. We did, there was one house that we worked with Habitat and did some rehab for exactly that kind of a scenario, and certainly a worthy thing that we should be looking at. We do have $152,000 in our fund, trust fund, earmarked for affordable housing. I do believe that we paid this past year out of the fund. We did. And, you know, the question is that what we want to do going forward, or do we want to just make this a budget item?
I think we'd like to pay it out of the fund.
Especially this year.
Yeah, it's a tough year, as Mr. Lindsay would say.
Remind me again what.
Yeah, how much is it?
I believe it's $152,000 right now.
No. The cost of the regional housing consultant?
We agreed to up to $10,000 a year, and as I said, this year they only spent, you know, 7 or 8. They spent less than the.
Oh, okay.
Than the amount.
Oh, I thought we paid the same, but we didn't get the hours, so as you say, we really were ahead of the game.
Those hours are still there for us.
Yeah.
That's the billing.
When we decided last year to pay this money out of the fund, it was because we had already missed the budget cycle. And hoped that we wouldn't miss it in the future. Because while this is necessary work and it protects the town interest in existing units that are in town, it doesn't produce any new units, which I think the Affordable Housing Trust is really trying to do.
A lot of this work is front-loaded too, in that there's a lot to do in the beginning to get it going, but monitoring and keeping it up to par is a lot less.
Yeah, are you doing advisory on this?
No.
Yeah, maybe too late for this year. We're well down that road right now.
I mean, I think it should be a budget item, and rather than continuing to tap into these funds, but if it's going to be $8,000 or less for the upcoming year, I think that probably makes sense. So we don't have a new contract to sign. I mean, we're just sort of, we're agreeing that this is.
It really is we made the commitment that after 1 year, we'd review it, and we had the opportunity to walk away from it if we weren't happy with it.
Okay.
We met, the three of us, I think, are, all in support of continuing for another year.
Mm-hmm.
And then a year from now, we'd have to decide whether we wanna continue.
Okay,
So it's not,
I see.
we're not making any long-term commitment. But it, certainly, we saw the value of the first year.
No, it's fine with me.
So I would, make a motion among this group that we vote to, continue this contract for another year at the parameters that were set in the original agreement.
All set, okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Well, great. Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
We'll be back, we have some land to talk about.
We're staying. I don't think they worry either way.
What?
If she's asking for a second.
Oh.
People are gonna pass over that.
Yeah, well, no, we don't wanna hear.
More to add on that.
We don't wanna hear Minuteman again, so the next item on our agenda is the Board of Selectmen business, and the first item was the appointment to the Parks and Recreation Committee of Linda Harbison. Harbison, I'm sorry. Thank you for stepping up. We've, it seems increasingly it's difficult to get folks to fill some of these positions. What are you hoping to focus on Parks and Rec?
I'm a beach person. I've been a lifeguard at the beach for 9 years. I've been beach manager and swim teacher there for 2 years. And I've worked closely with Parks and Rec because that's where our funding comes from, and they help out a lot. And there was nobody to fill that position, so I said, would it be a conflict of interest if I just went on to Parks and Rec and then I could do. So I've seen what it looks like from the beach manager perspective. So I'd love to work with that.
That's great.
Great. Well, again, thanks for stepping up.
Well, I move that we appoint Linda Harbison to the Parks and Rec Commission.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And how long does this appointment run through?
That's a good question.
Let's call it 3 years.
Make it 5. I was gonna say, let's give it a 3.
About 7.
It's not getting away.
I could be, doesn't it just run to the election?
Yes, it does.
It just
That's
runs,
right.
I think
It's-
it runs to
it's
the
elected.
caucus, and
It's
then you run,
elected,
and then you get nominated at the caucus.
Yes, that's right. It's an elected position.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is an appointment to the Conservation Commission. Karen Overfield. You've already been serving as an associate on Concom,
Yeah, been a listener.
so you've again, thank you for stepping up. I think Concom in particular had
Interesting call.
yeah, well, no, interesting call, but also the sort of history of, having difficulty getting members, but again, I think it seems to be somewhat rejuvenated. But as you've seen, it's, you get a range of applicants there, and I like to remind people on these quasi-judicial boards that you always have to treat the miserable developer just like the nice homeowner, that everyone has to be sort of treated fairly, even if sometimes that can be difficult, but that it's it's just important, sort of fundamental fairness and to hear people out. But I think it's great. Sounds like you have sort of a technical background, and I think that could always come in handy. Are you how close you're on Harvard Road, are you close to the potential pipeline? And I just flagged that.
I'm just across the street from it, but I'm not in the zone, I'm just adjacent to it.
Yeah, no, you might, on the, state ethics they can be pretty peculiar about, folks, like happens more in the zoning context where they say, someone on a planning board can't, deal with a project that's adjacent to them. And so you may be far enough away that there's no possibility your property is going to be affected one way or the other, but they kind of have this presumption anybody in the neighborhoods or anyone nearby is affected. So you just might want to be sensitive to that. But if you can say, whether that pipeline's in or isn't in, your property is going to be unaffected, then you could participate in it, I think. So that's something you might want to check with them. But again, thanks for stepping up and joining the commission. We appreciate it. Because I think one of the most important things selectmen do is appointing people to committees, and often we don't have that many choices. And so so it is great when people step up.
Okay, well, we appoint Karen Overfield to the Conservation Commission, and that would run.
I'm not sure of the
There
term
is
on
no
that one.
election,
That-
right?
that's
That is not.
That will run in perpetuity. And we're going to appoint her for life.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank
you.
All right, the next item on our agenda is a request from Bolton Access Television to release funds. Where's Bert?
Good evening. You guys look very photogenic. I've been watching you on television. The audio is excellent. The video is very clear.
Wow.
So they're not quite sure.
Just for the audience, my name is Frank Laskin, and I'm the treasurer of Bolton Access Television. Yeah, I'm here to talk about the release of funds, and I believe we got an email from Comcast that the selectmen also got, and the amount of the funds that we're looking to get is something $25,960.
$25,976. Or maybe you don't want every penny.
Yeah, I thought he was being generous, leaving some for us.
Right, $25,976.
Okay.
Okay. Any discussion, anything?
No.
Okay, move that we release the funds, the $25,976
I'll
to
second.
Bolton Access Cable.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, very good. So will a check be cut and it'll be in a mailbox in Town
Yes.
Hall that I'll pick up? Okay.
I'll let you know when it's available.
Well, thank you, that's very kind. All right, well, I see you're moving along very quickly with the agenda now that you've got some of the big things out of the way.
Well, we're trying to make up for some lost time, but.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is to review and execute the Tondine site plan decision.
There's any real discussion?
Yeah, it's kind of a bare bones decision. Is that our usual practice? I guess we had no particular conditions that we had added.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, because usually a site plan review, I just have in the minutes, but since you referred to us doing a decision, I thought I'd do it alone.
No, and would we execute the Tondine site plan decision?
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You tappers are great. Next item on our agenda is a request to overspend snow and ice, line item 423 by $150,000.
And just so you know, Mr. Chairman, in case the $150,000 seems excessive to you, we've already spent it. And Harold informed me today that to get us through the end of the season, there'll be one more request coming for an additional 70.
Beyond this.
So in that will bring us up to,
It'll be 370 plus 180, so it'll be 550.
it,
If my numbers are correct, I think they are.
I thought it was 180 plus 300, so it's 480 plus another 70. So it'd be 550.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
I was hoping that's what I said, but.
Yeah. I think that we ought to, I don't know if this is in your draft warrant, but the accountant's idea last year that we should have town meeting, whatever the deficit ends up being, pay that out of free cash rather than looking to turnbacks. And because you end up in the same place, except you're assured that you're not going to have a deficit if you do that. That we ought to consider that on the.
I don't have any such article on the warrant right now, but we can certainly add one.
Yeah, no, because I mean this year, we had the assurance from advisory, oh, don't worry, there'll be enough money there, and there wasn't. So we had this $100,000 deficit that we had to cover in the tax rate, and I think that we should try to avoid that. And if in fact you have enough turnbacks, it turns into free cash and it's a wash. But
we actually, I mean, if you look at the raw turnbacks, there was pretty close to enough money to offset the deficit last year. The problem is the restriction we have of only being able to do 3% or $5,000, whichever is greater. So the opportunity isn't there, even though the total amount of money we get in turnbacks looks like there would be. So I just wanted to clarify that. But I know you know that. But.
yeah. All right, so we need to vote on the.
I move that we approve the request to overspend snow and ice line item by $150,000.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The next item on our agenda is a discussion of support for placement of proposed Jake Break article on the annual town meeting warrant. I just sort of, as I was looking this over, I was questioning the idea, why are we exempting town vehicles? I mean, if we have this emergency exclusion, and it's not, it just sort of strikes me as one of these things, Congress is always passing things and excluding themselves from the scope of all these other laws. It's like, why are we giving ourselves this safe harbor? I mean, if it's an emergency, any vehicle can use them.
Well, actually, I think I can answer that. We actually, as I said earlier, we had the first draft of the warrant reviewed by town council, and they had comments in several areas, and I included the Jake Break law, bylaw in anticipation of it being included on the warrant. And town council did have some comments in that area along the lines of, why are you looking at only town vehicles? If there's a state or federal emergency, those vehicles would be in play as well. And then the bigger question of what constitutes an emergency. So those were his, he didn't really change any of the language, he just pointed out the observation and didn't know if we should be having a broader definition or just using a general definition of emergency. But he did make a similar comment. When I do send the updated warrant out Monday morning, I'll certainly get the warrant to you, Jonathan, and the comments from town council, so you can see them.
I mean, as this is structured now, that anyone has an exemption for an emergency, and then we have a separate exemption, all drivers of town vehicles, emergency or not, it's the safe harbor. And I'm just not,
Yeah, it was a similar comment from
Yeah.
town council, not the same, but very similar. Yeah. I initially said we should exempt town vehicles because they're, I think of the DPW and the fire department and realized that they're gonna be making some noise. I hadn't thought through the bigger issue of, they're not the only vehicles that, could be governmental vehicles that could be going through town. And then how do we, what is an emergency, I guess, so.
no?
So a big part of, the bylaw, the name of it's kind of changed to compression release, engine brake use, and serviceable mufflers. And from the literature, it's the combination of using Jake brakes with mufflers that have been modified or haven't been maintained. And I did some research today. I downloaded a decibel meter app for 99 cents. Anybody can do it. And I took some readings at the St. Teresa Church, and also that's a slowdown area coming into Bolton from the west, and I also took some at Fox Run entrance. And what I found is it's both trucks braking using their Jake's brakes, but it's also trucks accelerating that have these bad muffler systems. So, they're right, they're these great new trucks like FedEx trucks, and they go whizzing down 117 by Fox Run, and they're coming in at 80 decibels, which is, under the limit and very quiet. That's like 10 more decibels in a car. But, the Jake breakers and the accelerating trucks with bad mufflers, they're coming in at 96 to 109. And, just to put that in perspective, that's like carrying a hand tool around, where it's like hand tools driving through town, but right, 3 feet from your ears. That's the equivalent. So it's really trying to get at, these trucks that aren't maintaining, or they've hot rodded their muffler systems. I don't think anybody has any complaints about the fire truck, the snow plows. I've never heard those guys. You can hear the loud trucks miles away.
Mark?
During one of your last selectmen's meeting, when this was brought up, I wasn't able to attend. I was sick and I was on the edge of my seat and chomping at the bit. And unfortunately, you need to put the horse ahead of the cart, so the cart ahead of the horse. The problem is the excessive noise, and it comes from motorcycles as well. We already have excessive noise laws in effect. If you pass this Jake brake modified muffler law, how are you going to enforce it? You're going to have to get officers out there with decibel meters and issue citations. Why aren't we just enforcing the existing law that's already in place? I've held a commercial driver's license for 26 years. Drive trucks that have compression brakes, and the biggest problem is the modified exhaust systems. A person that I work with almost daily has just purchased a 2015 vehicle. You cannot hear the engine brake come on. You can hear tone change of the motor. You cannot hear the engine brake come on. The chief quoted that, or stated that this is going to be sort of, phasing out over a period of time. As the technology changes, you're still going to have the people modifying the exhaust. Why aren't we going after the problem, which are the people that are doing something illegal already? This is a safety precaution, a major portion. I mean, I live on Old Bay Road. I hear, when the summertime when the screens are open, I can hear the engine brakes on 117. I can hear them coming over Wilder Road. I can hear them on Wattaquatic. It's because the people are not following the law. I think that we should really be careful about limiting the use of compression brakes because it is a very important safety issue. I think that you should go after the law that's already in place for excessive noise and enforce it. And the other thing that some of our residents have a hard time swallowing is that it should be brought forth, if it does get brought forth, that it should be a citizen's petition and not through the planning board, just because of Jonathan's sensitivity to the issue.
I think actually what we're considering is whether the Board of Selectmen is gonna sponsor it. As a commercial truck driver, I mean, if you have signs saying, you know, compression brakes, barred in Bolton or something like that, I mean, do you ever see signs like that?
I will tell you that there's one in Leominster.
Right.
And the only time if I'm in a vehicle that's equipped with an engine brake, the only time I switch the switch off is when you're parking the vehicle. Or when you first get in and start up, make sure it's off while the truck is warming up. Other than that, you can run the truck efficiently without having the engine brake come on unless you need it. In Leominster, I switched the engine brake off on the truck because I wanted to try to do the right thing. Because I'm in habit of not switching it off. And when I got to Lunenburg, car pulled right out in front of me. First instinct is you release your foot from the accelerator, which would cause the engine brake to come on. Guess what? Switch isn't on. Got to switch the switch, downshift, try to make the next shift. The brake, the brakes. When you're talking about coming down 117 to 110, Jonathan's talking about, if brake wear. Well, it's not just brake wear, it's called brake fade. When you're trying to stop a vehicle that weighs that amount of weight, the brakes, as you're applying them, they heat up. When they heat up, the drum swells. When the drum swells, the brakes don't work as well. So not using a compression brake is like only using 2 of your brakes on your car instead of 4 of the brakes on your car. And it's dangerous, extremely dangerous not using an engine brake.
But you say yourself, you would not, if there was one, and I don't know, I mean, I live on Fox Run, but the other end.
Wise choice.
But it seems like it's the center, the run down into the center of town, I think is the more likely place to see a sign there, and I think you're saying yourself that you'd honor that. And so I think there are gonna be people that are honoring, if we have this bylaw and we have signs up, I think things will be quieter, no?
I think that you need to start enforcing the laws that are in place. Worked at the library doing ice jams for a full day, and the trucks that go by, I can almost tell you which drivers are making the noise, because they're the ones that have the modified exhaust, and they're the same ones. It might be a group of them, but they're the same ones. And if you just start enforcing the laws that are in place, I will guarantee you that will change.
And what's the law that we're not currently enforcing on modified exhaust? That you
Excessive noise. They can pull over a motorcycle today if they wanted to for excessive noise. They can pull over a car for excessive noise and issue a citation.
And it's also if the police officer happens to be there. So
exactly.
So bylaw or no bylaw, decibel meter or no decibel meter, if the policeman doesn't happen to be on the officer doesn't have to be on 117 in that particular spot at that particular time, it's just like, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, it doesn't make any noise. So of course, but nobody heard it,
I would really want you to think about what you're passing, and I would lean more towards the excessive noise than the Jake brake usage.
Well, I listened to the chief last time, and I'm inclined to go with his recommendation, which would be not to pass this. To your point, there are existing laws for excessive noise already on the books that, if the officer is at that particular time there present, can deal with it and to start with signage first, and see how that goes, as opposed to implementing this, which will require some amount of cost and training and whatnot, which is an expense that we don't necessarily need to do right now, given the odds of all the stars aligning that the officer with the decibel meter will be at the same spot at the same time as the truck that has the modified exhaust and applying the brake, so I'm more inclined to not move forward with this, although certainly people have the option of putting it up as a citizen's petition, if they wish, but I'm inclined to go with the chief's recommendation.
I mean, I asked the question of the chief about the cost, and I think his feedback was very beneficial there.
But if you pass the bylaw, you still have to enforce it, so no matter what.
I think I sympathize with some of the people on Main Street. I also am very dubious about passing something like this and essentially saying that Bolton knows more about truck safety than Federal Highway Department does. I mean, I get the impression that you may be rethinking how, turning off your Jake brake when you're going through Leominster now after almost having hit somebody.
There's too many distractions.
Oh, I know those roads, and it's very, and especially with the way the weather, with the snowbanks and stuff, people are not looking the way that they usually do and don't have the sight lines available. So I'm generally not a supporter of the bylaw.
Well, it sounds like the selectmen aren't gonna sponsor this. I would. And I think that, I understand what the chief's saying, but I think that, if you wanted to, you could think of ways to enforce this instead of sort of thinking of ways that you can't enforce it. And I think your suggestion, use the existing laws, that's even more amorphous. The chief will never be able to, will always be able to come up with reasons why that can't happen, that we're not gonna be issuing excessive noise tickets. And I think that this is a real problem on Main Street, and I think that this bylaw will be helpful, but it sounds like it's not gonna be something that the Board of Selectmen are sponsoring, so we're gonna need if you're gonna go forward, that you need the 10 citizen petition, and the deadline for that is at the end of the month?
I think it's March 29th, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But what I can do to help facilitate that, if that's what's going to happen, is, I've got your latest wording on the draft of the warrant I have now, and I could forward you for your consideration the comments from our attorney, our town council, to see if you'd like to incorporate any of them. Because, as I'm sure you know, when we receive a citizen's petition, it has to go on verbatim the way it's submitted. So it can be amended on the town hall floor, but it can't be amended when the warrant is set up. So you might want to take one more look at it and make any final adjustments that you like. And then, and as I said, Monday morning, I'd be happy to get that to you.
That's great. I would like to know, get some statistics from the police department, because, there were assertions that, from people who've lived here a long time, that they've never seen trucks pulled over. And, then the police chief said that, Lieutenant Nelson had pulled over so many in the last year. It'd be nice to keep track of that, because, if you live on 117, you see the police cars and where they sit to catch passenger cars that are speeding or registration or other things. But, so we know they're there. We're just wondering, what are they doing about these loud mufflers? And I know if it was a loud, motorcyclist going by, they might get a citation or a warning, but it just doesn't seem like, the drivers of these trucks are getting any warnings at all for the loudness. And they are dramatically louder than the other trucks. You can't miss them. It's not about, you know, the squad cars are there and the trucks are passing.
Just as bad on Water Quad, I grew up on Water Quad.
Yeah, it's not just Maine, it's the whole, you know, it's 111, it's 110, it's all around the town. If you're outside, you can hear them buzzing along different parts of town. It's not just Main Street.
I can ask the chief to give me the stats for calendar 2014.
That would be great.
All right, the next item on our agenda is a discussion of the Neshoba Regional School District budget. And we were all at the advisory this past Tuesday to discuss that, and I guess you've been to more meetings since then, huh?
Oh, yes, I have. No, I was, originally I was at the budget workshop that was held several weeks ago with the district and the school committee. And primarily the extent of the budget workshop was primarily the district presenting their views and where there were budget increases that were going to be had in the FY16 regional school district budget. There wasn't, quite frankly, there wasn't a lot of discussion. There were a number of, several school committee members did ask some questions relative to specific areas, because there was really no discussion as to what the district had done relative to looking at the existing budget and where things could be streamlined or cut or realigned. There was just a presentation of primarily new items and the assessments that were going to be generated out by the district of the three towns. So from that perspective, there wasn't a lot of discussion about, you know, the details of the budget other than the additions that were going to be put forth. So that, unfortunately, that was a bit disappointing. I even asked the question, you know, what was being done, and they said that they had looked at it, but they didn't have any information to present as to exactly what they had looked at. At that meeting, a resident of Stowe, who was also a sitting selectman, presented the district with a letter requesting information on, essentially as a summary, the executive level personnel, who they were, and their titles, and their salary, and then any other additional benefits that they would have derived. And that gentleman did receive that information. And we'll be discussing that probably a little bit more at Tri-Town next week. As Larry had mentioned, we did have a brief, probably half-hour conversation with George King at this past Tuesday's advisory committee meeting, which gave the opportunity for the advisory committee to ask questions. And also, one of the Bolton School Committee representatives, Lorraine Ramasco, also attended the meeting and was up at the table talking with everyone. So it was just primarily a general discussion. Again, not much detail into what was scrubbed, even though we did ask that again. Just basically informing the advisory committee of, you know, the budget being what the budget is. I then also participated in yesterday's school committee meeting, of which the budget was discussed further. And there were, we had, well, Nancy Federspiel is the chairman of the school committee, and also Bolton School Rep Lorraine Ramasco was in attendance. Lynn Coletti from Stowe was there. Nicole, and I forget her last name, from Stowe was there. Maureen Bush from Stowe, also a school committee member, was there. Unfortunately, only one of the three Lancaster school committee reps was there, Kathleen Thayer. there was further discussion, and Mr. King presented a 6-page document outlining the rationale, to summarize, the rationale why the towns can afford the increases in the school district budget. There was some debate about that, and we're going to be discussing that further at Tri-Town. I think one of the agenda items that one of the selectmen put on there was to discuss that white paper, as they called it. There was also discussion about the use of the district's E&D excess and deficiency money, of which they have about $2 or $2.2 million. And over the course of the last 5 years, they've used about half of that to fund the budget. So it's interesting that our assessment is, the three towns' assessment is about a 5.05% increase. But when you look at the use of that E&D money to cover some of the expenses in the budget, it's actually a larger percentage in reality than 5.05%. But we'll be talking about that more again at the Tri-Town meeting next week. I did need to correct Mr. King in that he was characterizing E&D money in one way and sort of characterizing the fact that the town's free cash funds could be an unlimited amount of money. I only wish that were the case. But I did explain to the group that in particular Bolton years ago had at one point after certification a free cash amount in the $1.5 to $1.8 million range, quite a number of years ago, and that number right now is about half of that, and that we typically use about 75% of that, depending upon the year, either to balance the budget or to use that for capital projects. And I think the notion from the district is that we have this pool of $900,000 that we can just apply to the budget, and it's not going to be a problem, but we'll be discussing that further. So again, not a lot of discussion amongst the school committee members, and it was primarily left to the district, that being Mr. Wood and Mr. King, to look at some areas that they could possibly cut out of the budget. There were a couple of the school committee representatives who were asking the right questions, as opposed to the whole group, but hopefully Mr. King and Mr. Wood will come back with a slightly reduced budget. One of our school committee reps had asked for a budget in the 2 to 3% range increase as opposed to the 5.05, so we'll see what happens. We're hoping for a fairly well-attended Tri-Town meeting, which is being held here in Bolton, in this particular room on Wednesday the 4th. We'll be discussing the budget again in more detail with the district representatives, and hopefully we'll have some representation from the school committee as well. So that's pretty much where we're at right now. And Don, do you want any elaboration on if the budget is accepted the way it is, the implications to our finances?
Well, if the budget is accepted the way it is, as I said Tuesday night at the advisory meeting, our current numbers, which do not include the planned 2% COLA, is we would need approximately $517,000 of free cash to supplement the budget, whereas the past 2 years we have not needed free cash to supplement the budget, and we've used free cash. We use quite a bit of our free cash, regardless of what anyone says. In the past 2 years, we used it to purchase capital equipment, so that we didn't have to borrow for that, which is also some level of savings for the town. And I did reference Tuesday night that I did some quick modeling with our town accountant, and if this sort of trend continues, and as I said Tuesday night, The district said that one of the main drivers of this increase is increase in special needs. Well, once you get an increase in special needs like that, it's been my experience, having served on a school committee, that that is not a one-year blip. And Mr. King nodded in agreement, and when I met with Superintendent Wood yesterday, one-on-one, I made the same observation, and he agreed as well. So, just doing simple modeling, using conservative growth numbers for our town operating expenses, and a 6% growth number for the district's budget year over year going out to FY20, which is a lower growth than it is this year, the $517,000 plus for FY16 by the time we get to FY20 is 1.3 million. And even if we were to reduce that by 25% by saying that we're being overly aggressive in some of these areas, you're still talking about 7 figures. And this type of growth is not affordable for any of the towns. I don't care how many times somebody else says it is, it's not. And it's absolutely not sustainable. That's all I have to say.
Well, I think it's already become not sustainable.
I think the two things I would add, one.
And I'm sorry, but before I forget, I also want to add, it also assumes going to the full Prop 2.5 levy limit, which we also have not had to do the past couple of years.
Yeah, I was going to mention one of the things in this white paper is that the towns are not taxing to the full levy limit, so therefore we have plenty of money available for the school to use. And the other, and this is kind of a small, well, potentially small thing, but the school is good on coming up with initiatives, but not putting in place the metrics to know whether those initiatives are worthwhile or not. This, two things that have come up recently. One is going to full day kindergarten for everybody without having done any analysis of the current optional program to know whether that actually improves the outcome of the students. You know, over a couple of years. I mean, are we getting any bang for the buck there?
Right.
Or is our you know, to put it bluntly, is that extra half day essentially taxpayer subsidized daycare?
Right.
And the other thing is the initiative this year was the Chromebooks for all of the 8th graders, and then continuing that on through. And that's, I mean, it's not huge money. It's $30,000, but you know, a lot of little pinpricks here add up. And they're not looking at whether this is a pilot or, you know, or that they're going to do this for 3 to 5 years and then evaluate whether we've improved the MCAS or improved SATs or improved, you know, whatever metrics they want to put in place. It's just we think it's a good idea, so we're going to do it. And I think there's a lot of that sort of thing that's in the budget that really has no return on investment analysis. I mean, if every kid has a Chromebook, that's great, but how many of them actually, how many of them benefit from that don't already have a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop at home that they would prefer to use anyway?
Well, actually, I'm glad you brought that up. The discussion of the Chromebooks came up both at the budget workshop a couple weeks ago, and it came up at the advisory committee meeting on Tuesday, and it came up again at the school committee meeting on this past Wednesday, yesterday. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple of school committee members who were asking those same questions. So, you know, if we purchase, why are we purchasing them, and what's the benefit, and what is the measurable outcome of this? You know, what are you trying to achieve? And unfortunately, the district could not articulate that in either of the meetings. And then also at the budget workshop, there was a discussion of there are declining MCAS scores in schools in Bolton, and in Stowe is sort of about the same. And you know, some of the school committee members were asking, you know, what's the plan to reverse that trend. And again, there still wasn't necessarily a clear answer on that. Just to mention, full-day kindergarten, or preschool, that's supposed to be a pilot project. I know there was a debate in one of the school committee meetings that to make sure that it remained a pilot until the results of whether it was beneficial or not were there. Folks need to know now that parents who want to put their children into the full-day program have to pay. So, you know, the additional cost to provide personnel for that program, the parents are paying for that. If the district opts to go to full-day kindergarten only, then it becomes a no-cost option to all the parents, which means a fairly significant budget impact to provide the personnel and the resources to do that. Because as long as you have half-day kindergarten and full-day is optional, the full-day parents have to pay. If the district goes to full-day kindergarten for the entire district, then it becomes no cost. There's tremendous budget implications with that as well, which I don't think have been addressed. Finally, I thought of one more, is that while we have had a discussion about potentially starting to fund at a very modest level our OPEB, which is, I guess, future retiree commitments, which will be mandated by the state, the district, which has a much more significant obligation at the moment, there is absolutely no discussion about funding that, or no discussion about funding, even starting to fund that this year. And the folks in the audience need to know that that cost will eventually come straight to the towns. So right now, depending upon which report you look at, there potentially the liability in one report is over $40 million. And they have an arc, a yearly arc of about 2.4, I think that was. But we have to confirm that. But regardless, the liability that's outstanding at the moment is significant, and that's something that's going to eventually hit the bottom line of all three towns.
So the 2.4 million arc is about a 5% bump in the budget, in the school budget, that's sitting out there waiting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Just to put that on top of the 6% that we already have this year.
Right.
So. Yeah.
But we'll be talking more about all of this next week.
Oh boy.
Tri-Town, next Wednesday?
Next Wednesday, 7 o'clock, Houghton Building.
Mr. Lindsay.
If just taking the school budget increase and the OPEB, currently in at 186, that's a little over $1 million. That works out to $500 a house increased taxes. And if you folks stay with your idea of raising the end of process free cash target from 250, where it was last year, to 500, you'll add another 125 per house.
Is anybody actually talking about that?
Who's talking about that?
You guys were talking about it at the Selectmen's meeting 2 months ago.
No. No, we've never had any discussion about raising the level of free cash. Well, we had a philosophical discussion about doing that. It was more in line of, you know, what's if the state says between 3 and 5%, is the 3 to 5% at the end of the budgeting cycle, or is it at the point of being certified?
When you actually get the free
Right, right. But for the moment, there's no discussion that I'm aware of about raising the level of free cash after all the budgeting is done to 500K. So
I'm pleased to.
Okay. Not this year.
So if free cash was where you wanted it this year, we would have no ability to balance the budget, right?
And I would be pleased with that, because you'd be forced to make some cuts.
That's what I figured.
My
It's a sort of,
my concern is you never have
strangled
to
the-
make any cuts because you get all this free cash and go merrily on your way and it gets baked into the tax rate.
But when the school starts funding their OPEB requirement, then we're gonna be, hit the hard, Prop 2.5 limit, and then we'll have to cut.
But David, the 185K number came about in a much earlier discussion, before all this 5.05% came.
I understand that these numbers are not final at all.
Right.
I just want to get across that you're talking a lot of taxes.
I don't think you need to remind us.
Okay.
I think you remind, because remember, we're all paying the taxes too. So I mean, you're not the other one that gets affected by this. So we have great motivation here, because we're in the same swimming pool as you are.
And if we ever had a price decline in houses, the max $25 tax rate is not very far away.
But it's going in the other direction though.
Yeah, right now.
Right now.
and it's a lagging indicator. The next item on our agenda is the Selectmen's Annual Report, which I still haven't written. But instead, I'll report on what happened in Berlin last night at the open house on the pipeline, which I attended, and it seemed like it was fairly lightly attended. There were as many Kinder Morgan people there, it seemed like, as members of the public, and so that's maybe, I don't know, 30 or 40 Kinder Morgan. There's actually a picture in the Telegram, accompanying the Ken Cleveland story, and I was actually in the picture, but it gave a good overview of sort of what the ratio was. The Kinder Morgan folks were very polite and tried to be helpful, but what I found is, if you found someone who couldn't answer your question, they would direct you to a more senior person who couldn't answer your question. And a lot of misinformation, I thought, because the folks who were on the front lines really didn't know the facts. And so I was asking, for example, about alternative routes, whether any have been considered for the Worcester lateral. And I was assured, oh, absolutely, they have, and it was in our filing, and that was wrong. There were alternatives for the main route, but none for Worcester. So that guy confirmed he was wrong, and then directed me to the project manager, who said, no, they hadn't looked at any yet, but it was true that the FERC is very interested in their attempting to co-locate with electric lines. And I pointed out that there's an electric line that intersects with the current Fitchburg lateral that would get them down to Worcester, and also seemingly go past Sterling and West Boylston, that are towns that are interested in this. And actually, to his credit, this Mr. Lucas made notes of that fact. He didn't seem to be familiar with it. But he also, at the same time, didn't know, and I asked the question that never got answered at our meeting back in June, why is the 12-inch pipe coming off of a 10-inch lateral? That flummoxed him. He had no idea. He thought, he didn't know those, he had to go check on that and said, yes, I was right, it was the current Fitchburg lateral is 10-inch. So I wasn't impressed with the level of knowledge. I guess there was a FERC representative there, and he said that in the next month or so, maybe a little bit longer, FERC is going to be holding some sort of a scoping, what they call a scoping meeting. But among the things they're interested in hearing at that session are alternative routes that the company ought to be asked to consider. And he said that's absolutely the sort of thing that they want to hear about at the scoping session. He also said, and this was interesting, that FERC is not going to approve a pipeline when great portions of it have not been surveyed. And so I don't know how, I know a lot of landowners are not giving permission to survey, but at some point Kinder Morgan has to come to grips with that. There's a mechanism they can go to DPU in Massachusetts and get the right to survey on people's property, but they haven't done it, and I'm not sure if they're just waiting on that, but that's going to come to a head as well. So it was and the one last point was, and this was, I took pictures with my iPhone, maybe I'll circulate them. on their board, we are literally the poster boy for wonderful pipelines, that they have pictures of beautiful pipelines, and part of it is Harvard Road, Bolton, and there's a view of the pipeline there. Then they have a picture, pipelines, safe, clean, helpful, and they say Fox Run Road, Bolton, and there's a picture at the top of at the edge of the soccer fields or the lacrosse field saying the pipeline marker, and then the high school fields beyond. And so they're using Bolton as part of their presentation for how harmless pipelines can be. So, all right, then.
Okay.
The last item on our agenda is review minutes. Do we have any?
No.
No? All right. Well, I guess we're done. No executive session?
No.
Good.
Okay, I move that we adjourn.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.